3 ingredients. That is all it took to stretch $1 into a full plate in a household where the money ran out before the month did. A can of tomatoes, a handful of cornmeal, and whatever cut of meat the butcher was about to throw away. In 1970s Detroit, in 1960s Mississippi, in 1980s Chicago, that arithmetic kept entire families fed. Number 14 on this list turns a single sweet potato into something most restaurants today could not replicate. Number 73 uses nothing but flour, water, and bacon grease, and it held together Sunday supper for a family of 8. And number 41 on this list still costs less than $1 to make right now in 2026. Every meal on this list came from the same kitchen, one where complaining about dinner was not permitted and throwing away food was unthinkable. Hit subscribe so the next one reaches you. Here are 100 cheap 3-ingredient meals Black seniors made when money was tight. Number 16, Cushaw squash stew for 1. Cubing a piece of Cushaw squash, that pale green, crook-necked southern cousin of the pumpkin, was a Wednesday afternoon project for a retired school teacher in Lake Charles, Louisiana in 1981. A whole Cushaw at the farm stand cost $1, and a single squash could feed her for a week. She would cut a thick wedge, peel it, dice it into 1-inch cubes, then stew it down in a small pot with a tablespoon of butter, a teaspoon of brown sugar, a shake of cinnamon, and a half cup of water. 45 minutes later, the cubes had collapsed into a soft, golden, mildly sweet stew that ate like a side dish and a dessert at the same time. She spooned it over a slice of stale white bread to soak up the syrup at the bottom of the bowl. The rest of the squash went into the icebox wrapped in wax paper, ready for tomorrow and Friday. Your grandmother called it supper. Number 21, sawmill gravy and biscuits. The name came from lumber camps, where cooks fed crews for pennies. You rendered salt pork in a skillet, stirred flour into the drippings until golden, then poured in milk and scraped the bottom until it thickened into a pale, peppery gravy. Pour that over a split biscuit, and you had breakfast that stuck to your ribs until supper. In Black households across the rural South, sawmill gravy was the breakfast that appeared when there was not any meat for the plate. The gravy was the meat course, flavored with drippings that gave it a richness disguising how little pork was involved. Grandmothers had been making biscuits by feel for decades, cutting lard into flour with their fingers, adding buttermilk until the dough felt right. Biscuits in 12 minutes, gravy in 8, a full breakfast for 5 people, less than 30 cents. Number 19, egg and tomato skillet. This was the meal a Delta grandmother made when there was almost nothing left. A can of tomatoes poured into a hot skillet with onion and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. When it started bubbling, she cracked 2 eggs right into the sauce and covered the skillet until the whites set. You scooped it onto toast or a hoe cake. A can of tomatoes cost 29 cents in 1980. Eggs cost 59 cents a dozen. The whole meal cost less than 15 cents. In the rural Black South, nobody called it anything fancy. They called it eggs and tomatoes. A retired cotton gin worker in Clarksdale made this 3 mornings a week and twice for supper. She said breakfast food for dinner was not laziness, it was freedom. You cooked what you wanted when the house was yours alone. Number 21, salt pork gravy, overday old biscuits. No biscuit was ever thrown out in a Black household in 1960 because a tough biscuit became the foundation for the cheapest gravy on the planet. 2 small cubes of salt pork rendered in a skillet until the bottom was coated in golden fat. A heaping spoon of flour stirred into the grease-brown slow, and then a cup of evaporated milk thinned with water got whisked in until the gravy was thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. The yesterday biscuits, hard and a little stale, got split open and laid in the bowl, and the gravy poured over them softened them right back to fresh. Working families in Memphis and Birmingham ate this twice a week through the winter months. It used what was already in the kitchen. It cost about a dime in ingredients, and it sat heavy enough to last a full morning of work. The plate went out the door warm, and the bowl came back empty by the second swallow. Number 16, salmon croquettes from a can of pink salmon. A can of double Q pink salmon ran $1.19 at the Kroger in 1984, and one can made 6 patties. A grandmother in Jackson, Mississippi, opened the can, picked out the round bone, and crumbled it back into the flesh because that was where the calcium hid, and added a chopped onion, 2 beaten eggs, a handful of yellow cornmeal, and a shake of Laurie's seasoned salt. She formed the mix into 6 fat discs and pan-fried them in a 1/4 inch of Crisco until the cornmeal crust went deep gold. 3 minutes aside, she served them with white rice, pinto beans, and a slice of Wonder Bread folded in half. 6 patties, 2 suppers, 1 small dignity. Her mother had taught her in 1947. She had taught your mother in 1971. The can looked the same in every kitchen you walked into. Number 16, black-eyed peas and rice. The pot of black-eyed peas was the dish that carried a year of luck and a week of meals in the same heavy lid. A pound bag of dry peas cost 40 cents at the corner grocery in 1987. A single smoked turkey wing cost $1, and the 2 of them simmered together for 2 hours with onion and garlic until they tasted older than the kitchen they were cooked in. The broth turned brown and smoky and clung to every grain of long grain rice underneath. Served over hot white rice with a splash of vinegar hot sauce and a side of chopped raw onion, it was the cheapest, complete protein supper a black working household could put together in the late 1980s. Hoppin' John was the Carolina name for it, but Detroit and Chicago grandmothers cooked the exact same pot and just called it Wednesday. Black-eyed peas were luck you could eat with a spoon. Number 19, the hot plate itself. The single burner hot plate has its own history, and it is worth telling because that little coil shaped how a whole generation of black seniors ate alone. The first electric hot plates rolled out of factories in the early 1920s, sold by Sears Roebuck for around $4, but they did not reach poor and black households in any real number until after World War II, when surplus Army models hit the secondhand stores along Lenox Avenue and South Parkway for $2.50. By the late 1950s, rooming houses across the country, from Harlem to Houston to East St. Louis to North Philadelphia, banned full kitchens to cut their fire insurance bills in half. Landlords allowed exactly 1 hot plate per tenant, sometimes chained to the table leg with a length of bicycle cable so it could not walk off in the night. The Westinghouse 500-watt model, with its black bakelite handle and its single chrome dial that turned from low to high with a satisfying click, became the workhorse of senior survival across the urban North. By 1968, black widows living on Social Security checks of around $55 a month were stretching $12 weekly food allotments across 1 coil, 1 kettle, and 1 well-seasoned iron skillet. The Great Migration delivered millions of black seniors into northern cities where they aged in single rented rooms with no stove, no oven, no refrigerator beyond a small icebox in the hallway. The hot plate was not a convenience. It was a kitchen, a memory keeper, and a quiet partner at the table. The part that surprised me going back through old housing surveys from Chicago and Detroit is how many obituaries from the 1970s mentioned that the deceased had cooked their last 40 years of suppers on a single coil that fit in a shoebox. One burner, 100 recipes, a whole way of living kept warm by a glow no bigger than a saucer. Number 22, butter beans with smoked turkey wings. Turkey wings were one of the cheapest cuts in the store, and they carried more smoke flavor than most people gave them credit for. Rinse the wings, lay them in the crock pot with a pound of dry butter beans that had soaked overnight, a chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic, salt, pepper, and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. Set it to low and walk away for 7 hours. The beans swelled into something creamy and rich, and the turkey fell apart until the bones slid out clean. That broth turned thick on its own. No roux, no flour. One pot made enough for 3 suppers, and the leftovers were better than the first bowl. In the dead heat of a southern summer, when garden tomatoes split on the vine from ripeness, nothing in the world tasted better than a tomato sandwich. 2 slices of soft white bread, a thick layer of Duke's mayonnaise, never Miracle Whip, never Hellmann's in certain households, fat slices of tomatoes still warm from the afternoon sun, salt, and black pepper. Duke's, first produced in Greenville, South Carolina in 1917, became the standard across black southern kitchens because it was tangier than the competition, with no added sugar cutting the richness. The tomato sandwich was strictly seasonal, available only during those few weeks when everything aligned, and it carried a joy that could not be rushed or replicated in winter. Seniors who grew up tending gardens talk about these sandwiches the way other people talk about holiday feasts. You ate one standing at the counter, juice running down your wrist, and for just a minute the whole summer opened up around you, and you were small again in your mother's kitchen, reaching for the salt. A fried egg on white bread with hot sauce proved a black grandmother living alone had everything she needed, because she knew exactly what to do with 2 ingredients and a hot skillet in under 5 minutes. She cracked the egg into a thin slick of bacon grease, covered it with a saucer, never a lid, always a saucer, and let the steam finish the white without flipping. The yolk stayed intact and runny. When she slid it onto plain white bread and hit it with 3 shakes of Louisiana hot sauce, she had a complete protein breakfast that held her past noon. The saucer was the secret. Most people flipped the egg and killed the yolk, or left it uncovered and the white stayed wet on top. The steam method took 2 minutes flat and was never written down in any kitchen, anywhere. It was passed through watching, not words. Crystal and Louisiana brands were the trusted names. Now she's gone, and someone else lives in that kitchen, and they use a lid. Canned mackerel and rice was the cheaper cousin of salmon croquettes. The can cost half as much and sat just as long on the shelf. The mackerel was drained, flaked with a fork, and heated in a skillet with diced onion, garlic powder, and a few shakes of hot sauce. Served over white rice, sometimes with canned tomatoes stirred in for color, this was dinner in under 10 minutes. The flavor was stronger than salmon, fishier, bolder, the kind of taste that filled a room and let neighbors know someone was cooking. In black communities along the Gulf Coast and through the Mississippi Delta during the 1950s, canned mackerel was a pantry essential that stretched across 3 meals if the rice held out. The old women who made this best added a squeeze of lemon at the end, just enough acid to brighten everything. Their grandchildren still reach for the lemon without knowing why. This is the one people don't talk about, the dinner that lived between hunger and shame. Couscous was the Cajun and Creole fried cornmeal breakfast that most people outside Louisiana have never heard of, and most people inside Louisiana have stopped making. You made a thick batter from cornmeal, salt, baking powder, and milk, then scraped it into a cast iron skillet coated in bacon drippings. The key was that you did not stir it. You left the batter alone, let the bottom crust form, then broke it apart with a spatula into rough, crispy clumps. Then you poured warm milk and cane syrup over the plate and ate it immediately. The 1901 Picayune's Creole Cookbook documented couscous as a traditional Cajun farm kitchen breakfast. It was cheap, filling, and required a practiced hand. Most people under 60 have never tasted it. Most people over 80 remember it the way they remember a specific grandmother, vividly and with the knowledge that it is gone. Hoppin' John combined black-eyed peas and rice into a dish that carried tradition, nutrition, and economy in every forkful. The peas were cooked with onion, garlic, and smoked meat until tender, then served over or mixed with fluffy white rice. Some versions added tomatoes or peppers, while purists kept it simple. The dish was famous as New Year's Day food, promising luck and prosperity, but seniors on fixed incomes knew it deserved a place at the table year-round. Black-eyed peas and rice together cost mere dollars, yet provided complete protein and lasting energy. One pot yielded enough servings for several days, and the flavors only deepened with time. Hoppin' John represented the genius of making filling, nutritious meals from the most humble and affordable ingredients available. The kerosene heater sat in the center of the main room, and there were rules around it that nobody wrote down. You didn't touch the wick adjustment. You didn't move it while it was burning. You cracked the window on the opposite wall 1 inch, no more, no less, because kerosene combustion consumes oxygen, and a sealed room was a dangerous room, but too much ventilation defeated the purpose. You checked the fuel level before bed and never let it fall past a quarter tank, because a sputtering wick threw soot into the air you breathed. By 1960, fuel oil and kerosene heated roughly 32% of American homes, and in the red line neighborhoods of Detroit and Chicago, where black families were locked out of mortgage programs that would have let them buy better insulated houses, a single portable heater was often the only supplemental heat between the family and a hard winter. The seniors who managed these heaters knew them intimately. They knew the sound of a wick burning right versus burning low. That knowledge was specific, operational, and largely died with them. If the kerosene heater's reach was limited by distance, the answer was to shrink the distance. That kind of detail only the women who baked it 3 times a week ever carried. Long before that iron cooled, the jars were lining the counter, mason jars of chow chow, the pickled relish that sat on every table and topped everything from beans to fish. Making it was a late summer project. Green tomatoes that would not ripen before frost, the last cabbage heads, bell peppers going soft, all chopped fine, salted overnight, drained, and packed into jars with hot vinegar, sugar, mustard seed, celery seed, and turmeric that turned the batch gold. In black households across the Carolinas and Virginia, chow chow was as essential as salt. Some families made it sweet, others loaded it with cayenne until a spoonful burned your eyes. The recipe was the grandmother's, guarded not on paper, but in proportions only she could measure by sight. When the last jar was sealed, she lined them up and counted. If the count was right, the supply lasted until next summer. Too few, and the family felt it by February. Those jars held the whole garden and the woman who put them there. Number 22, pot liquor over day-old cornbread. A widow in a brick walk-up in Gary, Indiana in 1977 never threw out the liquid at the bottom of a greens pot. That dark, salty broth, the pot liquor, was a meal in itself, the way her people had eaten it since the slavery years when the masters ate the leaves and the enslaved drank what was left. She would crumble a square of yesterday's cornbread into a deep bowl, ladle the warm pot liquor over it until the bread soaked through but still held shape, then eat it slowly with a spoon, sometimes a single boiled egg sliced on top, sometimes a few drops of pepper vinegar. The whole thing took 4 minutes to assemble and cost her almost nothing because the broth was a byproduct, not a recipe. It carried iron, calcium, and the memory of every collard pot her mother had ever cooked. They were following a memory. Number 18, sugar bread. A slice of white bread, a smear of butter or margarine, a heavy sprinkle of sugar. That was it. A mother folded the bread in half so the sugar would not fall out and handed it to a child on the way out the door. A loaf cost 21 cents. Sugar cost a dime. Margarine was 25 cents a pound, less than a dime per serving. This was not nutrition. This was a promise. A mother saying, I could not give you eggs this morning, but I can give you something sweet enough to make you forget that. In black neighborhoods of Memphis, Detroit, and Chicago, sugar bread was the breakfast of the Great Migration. Families who had moved north for factory jobs still ate it on payday mornings, long after they could afford something better, because some foods passed down through hard times carry more than calories. They carry the memory of when you could not afford anything else. Here is something that does not get said enough. The women who made these breakfasts were not cooking. They were engineering. They had a budget that was fixed, miles that were not, and a clock that gave them 20 minutes between waking up and getting a child out the door. Every ingredient had to justify its place. Every penny had to stretch. Every plate had to look full enough that a child did not go to school feeling poor. These were not recipes born from creativity. They were born from mathematics in kitchens that were too hot in summer and too cold in winter by women who had already been awake for an hour doing someone else's laundry. The breakfasts on this list are not nostalgia. They are evidence that black women in the 1960s fed families on budgets that should not have been survivable. Number 23, sardines and grits skillet. Most people under 40 have never eaten sardines on purpose. But for black seniors who grew up in the rural South, a can of sardines was a meal in itself. You cooked your grits in the skillet with water and salt until they thickened. Then you laid the sardines on top and added hot sauce. A can cost 25 cents in 1978. A pound of grits cost 35 cents and lasted 2 weeks. For a senior with arthritis who could not grip a knife or handle raw meat, this was the world's easiest hot supper. You opened a can, you stirred a skillet, you sat down and ate. A retired domestic worker in Greenville, South Carolina, ate sardines and grits 4 nights a week for 6 years after her husband's passing in 1982. She said the meal reminded her of her father, who ate the same thing every night after working the tobacco fields. Number 18, Streako lean and red-eye gravy. Few breakfasts spoke louder about black Southern survival than a thin slice of Streako lean with a pour of red-eye gravy on top. Streako lean was the cheap cousin of bacon, a piece of side meat with stripes of pink running through the fat. It cost half what bacon cost in 1965, sometimes only 15 cents a pound at a country store. 2 slices went into a hot pan and curled up tight as they crisped, leaving a thin layer of brown drippings stuck to the bottom. A half cup of strong black coffee poured straight into that hot pan, and the brown bits lifted off the iron in seconds. That dark, salty pour was the red-eye gravy. It went over a split biscuit or a wedge of cornbread, and the streak of lean sat right on top. The flavor was bigger than the price, and most older folks today still remember the smell of coffee hitting that pan first thing in the morning. For many of us, that one pour of red-eye gravy is the closest thing our grandmothers ever left behind to a written recipe. Number 11, black-eyed peas and hot links. New Year's Day in a senior's kitchen in Memphis ran on a 1-pound bag of camellia black-eyed peas at 59 cents and a pack of Earl Campbell hot links at $2. She soaked the peas overnight in a metal bowl, drained them in the morning, and dropped them into a pot with 6 cups of water, a chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic, and the hot links sliced into thumb-sized rounds. She let it simmer 2 hours uncovered until the peas went soft and the broth turned deep red from the link grease. A spoon of crystal hot sauce at the end, a square of cornbread on the side. The peas were for luck. The links were for the people who needed something with bite. She had been cooking the same pot every January 1st since 1959. The peas had outlasted the husband, the move, and the cut to her check. They were still on your grandmother's table on January 1st, 1986, with the radio playing. Number 11, hog head cheese on saltines. The corner deli counter in every black neighborhood from Houston to Norfolk kept a loaf of pressed hog head cheese under glass right next to the bologna in 1984. A quarter pound cost about $1.10, sliced thin on the wax paper, wrapped in white butcher paper, and tied off with a string. Back at the kitchen table, the slices laid flat on saltine crackers with a smear of yellow mustard and a thin shaving of raw onion on top. Cold from the icebox, the gelatin held its shape and gave back a peppery, vinegary bite that woke up the whole mouth. Then, the mall food courts opened across the country and the corner deli counter quietly disappeared, taking the hog head cheese with it. Working grandfathers ate this lunch, standing at the counter on a Saturday afternoon. Hog head cheese was the working man's lunch the suburbs forgot alone. Number 30, hot plate hoe cakes. Cornmeal saved more black seniors than any pension check ever did. On a single coil, a widow could mix a half cup of stone ground meal with hot water, a shake of salt, and a spoon of bacon grease saved in a coffee can on the windowsill. She patted the batter flat in a small black pan and let it crisp on one side until the edges curled like a fall leaf. 1 hoe cake was supper. 2 with a smear of molasses was Sunday. Buffalo soldiers carried hoe cakes in their saddlebags, and church mothers slid them under tea towels for the sick and shut-in. For a senior alone, this was the meal that turned a quarter pounder meal into dignity on a chip plate. Number 13, tripe stew with tomatoes and peppers. Tripe sat in the meat case looking like something most shoppers did not want to think about, and that is exactly why it stayed cheap, decade after decade. Soak it in salted water, rinse it twice, then cut it into strips and lay them in the crock pot with canned tomatoes, diced bell pepper, onion, garlic, a bay leaf, salt, pepper, and a pinch of red pepper flakes. Cook it on low for 10 hours. The slow heat turned the rubbery texture into something tender and almost silky. The tomato broth soaked up all that collagen and thickened into a stew that clung to a spoon. Tripe had a mild, clean flavor once it was cooked right, nothing like what people expected. The ones who knew how to cook it never corrected the ones who turned their noses up. They just had more for themselves. Serve it in a deep bowl with rice or a torn piece of white bread to soak up the broth. A pound of tripe and a can of tomatoes made enough food to last most of the week, and the grocery bill barely registered. The people who grew up eating it did not learn from a recipe. They learned by standing next to someone who already knew. A sweet potato wrapped in foil and baked slow needed no explanation and no company. You washed it, poked holes with a fork, wrapped it tight, and set it on the oven rack for an hour. The skin darkened and pulled away, and when you split it open, the inside was deep orange, steaming, almost too sweet to need the butter you pressed in anyway. Sweet potatoes trace their place in black cooking to the yams of West Africa, different plants, but carrying the same weight at the center of the table. Through the 1940s and 50s, one large sweet potato cost a few pennies, and a single one was enough for supper. For a person eating alone, it was complete, warm, filling, soft enough that teeth barely mattered. She ate it from the foil with a spoon, sitting by the window where the evening light came in, and it was the quietest meal on earth. Canned mackerel with hot sauce on crackers was the breakfast the elders who moved north during the Great Migration carried with them like a habit, because in the South, salt mackerel had been a kitchen staple for over a century, and its canned version cost under 30 cents in every corner, grocery from Harlem to the south side of Chicago through the 1960s. She'd crack the tin, drain it against the lid, break the fish with a fork right in the can, hit it with 3 shakes of hot sauce, Crystal if she came from Louisiana, Texas, Pete if she came from the Carolinas, and eat it on crackers, no bowl required. The bones were left in, always. Anyone who grew up eating canned mackerel knew the bones were soft and harmless, rich with calcium. You bit through them without thinking. If you picked them out first, you hadn't grown up with it. That small moment separated those who knew from those who were still learning. 1 can, 1 box of crackers, 5 minutes. Nothing wasted. Freed okra transformed a vegetable that some found challenging into crispy, addictive bites that disappeared quickly from any plate. Fresh or frozen okra was sliced into rounds, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and fried in hot oil until golden and crunchy. The cornmeal coating sealed in the okra's natural moisture while eliminating the sliminess that turned some people away. For seniors, frozen okra made this dish accessible year-round and eliminated the prep work of washing and cutting fresh pods. A bag cost little and provided several servings of vegetables disguised as something almost indulgent. Fried okra could be a side dish, a snack, or even a light meal when paired with sliced tomatoes and cornbread. The crunch satisfied cravings for something fried while still delivering the fiber and vitamins that aging bodies needed. Cornmeal porridge with blackstrap molasses told you, without sentimentality, exactly where you stood and what you were going to do about it. You cooked the cornmeal slow in water or thin milk until it thickened, then drizzled blackstrap molasses over the top in a slow spiral that sank in before you stirred it through. Blackstrap molasses was a staple of African American pantries for generations, the dark, bitter, mineral-rich byproduct of refining sugar cane, costing far less than refined sugar and delivering considerably more nutrition: iron, calcium, magnesium, and potassium, the minerals that kept working bodies going when meat was scarce and vegetables were seasonal. Enslaved people and their descendants depended on molasses as a primary sweetener from the 17th century onward, long before it became a Depression-era substitute. For those stretched thin through the lean years, this was the morning that made the rest possible. It cost pennies. It was warm, filling, and bittersweet in a way plain porridge never managed. She watched you finish every spoonful before you were allowed to leave.
Cowpea fritters were a dish that came straight out of resilience and memory, with roots reaching back to African cooking traditions. Families would soak and mash dried cowpeas, mix them with a little onion, cornmeal, and seasoning, then fry the mixture in hot lard until crisp on the outside and soft inside. They were cheap, filling, and carried the rich protein that many households could not always get from meat. For Black families in the South, cowpeas were already a staple crop, so using them to create something hearty made perfect sense. These fritters could be eaten plain or dipped in gravy, and they were often made in batches large enough to last a day or two. They carried a deep sense of history, because this kind of cooking showed how old-world techniques adapted to the realities of hard times in America. They were not only nourishment, but also a connection to ancestors who had relied on the same beans for strength.
Before anyone used the phrase thermal curtain, Black grandmothers in the 1960s had already invented the concept with whatever heavy fabric came to hand. Wool blankets tacked above the window frame and let hang to the floor. Velvet curtains doubled over to trap a pocket of still air against the glass. Old coats draped across exterior windowsills when the cold settled in hard. The principle was sound. Moving air carries heat away from a surface fast, and still air trapped in folds of heavy fabric insulates against that transfer. A single layer of curtain fabric against a drafty window could reduce heat loss through that pane by 30%, and a double layer did better still. What your grandmother hung in those windows was not decoration. It was calculation, an understanding of cold and cloth and the way heat behaves when you give it nowhere to escape. She couldn't tell you the R value of a wool blanket, but she could tell you which window needed 2 layers and which could get by with 1. It was about the gravy, and the gravy belonged to whoever held the giblet bag. Inside that small pouch tucked into the bird's cavity sat the liver, heart, gizzard, and neck, and in Black households, those parts did not get discarded. They were boiled with onion and celery until the neck meat fell off the bone and the organs could be chopped fine. The giblets went into pan drippings, thickened with flour and stretched with broth until the gravy turned dark and rich, flecked with tiny pieces of liver and heart that gave it a depth no plain drippings could match. Ladled over cornbread dressing, it was the soul of the holiday plate. The woman who made it was usually the eldest in the kitchen, and she did not share the stove. She tasted with her own spoon. She adjusted the salt without asking. When she passed the duty down, it meant she trusted your hands. In some families, that handoff never happened. The gravy just stopped being right. Number 19, the bean pot from Sunday into Wednesday. The piece no one tells you about cooking alone in a small kitchen is that the calendar matters more than the recipe. A retired Pullman porter's widow in the Hill District of Pittsburgh started a 1-pound bag of pinto beans every Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, the same hour her husband used to come home from the southbound run before he passed. The beans, soaked overnight in cold water, then went on the back burner Monday morning with a smoked ham hock, a quartered onion, a clove of garlic, 3 peppercorns, and 3 cups of water. They simmered all day at the lowest setting the stove would hold, the lid tilted just enough to let a thread of steam escape. By Monday supper, the beans were creamy, the broth was the color of strong tea, and the ham meat had fallen off the bone in soft brown ribbons. Here is the part that mattered. In 1978, the average Social Security check for a Black widow over 70 years old living in the South was $189 a month, and roughly 43% of those women lived alone in their own apartments, according to figures the Social Security Administration published the following year. 1-pound bag of pinto beans cost 49 cents that same year at the Kroger on Center Avenue. That single pot fed her Monday supper over rice, Tuesday lunch in a bowl with cornbread, Wednesday breakfast mashed on toast with hot sauce, and Wednesday supper as a thin bean soup with a splash of vinegar and a sprinkle of chopped raw onion on top. 4 meals out of 1 pot for a total of about 70 cents, counting the hock. The beans were never just beans. They were the rhythm of a small kitchen that still believed Sunday into Wednesday was worth cooking for. A single pot kept a woman alive and independent. Number 22, sweet potato pone, not a pie and not a casserole. something in between with no modern equivalent. You grated raw sweet potatoes until your knuckles ached, mixed the pulp with molasses, buttermilk, cinnamon, and lard, then poured it into a greased pan and baked it low and slow until the top turned dark and caramelized. The texture was dense and chewy, almost like pudding that decided to become bread. Sweet potatoes were the cheapest vegetable in the 1960s South. A bushel cost less than $1 at roadside stands. Grandmothers who grew their own paid nothing. They baked pone in the evening when the oven was already hot from supper, wrapped it in cloth, and set it on the counter for morning. A slice with coffee was a full breakfast, sweet enough to feel like a treat, substantial enough to carry a person through 4 hours of work. Number 18, smothered turkey wings. Turkey wings were the cheapest part of the bird, often less than 69 cents a pound. A senior would season them heavy with garlic powder, onion powder, salt, and pepper, brown them in a skillet until the skin crisped. Then pull them out, make a roux in the drippings with flour and butter, add water and onions, and put the wings back in. Covered and simmered for 90 minutes, the meat turned tender and the gravy turned thick and dark. Served over white rice, this tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. A retired postal worker in Jackson, Mississippi, named Thelma Reese, made smothered turkey wings every other Wednesday for 11 years after her husband died in 1979. She had one cast iron skillet her mother-in-law had given her in 1955. That skillet had cooked the wedding supper. It had fried fish for every church picnic. And now it fed one woman eating alone at a table that used to seat 8. Thelma did not cook because she was hungry. She cooked because the act of standing at her stove was the one thing nobody could take from her. The skillet was not just a pan. It was the last piece of her marriage that still worked every day. For a generation of Black women who spent their lives cooking for others, the hardest meal to make was the one for themselves alone. The turkey wings were cheap, the rice was cheap, but the dignity of sitting down to a proper supper in a quiet kitchen, that was worth more than everything in the grocery store combined. Number 24, one slab of fatback, 7 mornings. A single piece of fatback could feed a whole household for a week, and grandmothers in Mississippi and Alabama knew exactly how to make it last. They would buy one thick slab on Saturday for around 20 cents a pound, then score it across the top with a paring knife so the salt would render down slow. Monday morning, 2 slices went into the cold skillet. Those slices crisped up and gave back nearly a cup of clear, golden grease that flavored everything else that hit the pan that week. The skillet never got washed. The leftover grease became the cooking fat for Tuesday's eggs, Wednesday's grits, Thursday's potatoes, and Friday's hoe cakes. By Sunday, the original slab was almost gone, but the flavor had touched every plate that came through the kitchen. One pig and a careful hand could carry a family from one paycheck to the next, and almost no one threw away the brown bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. Number 22, tuna and rice casserole. A retired bus driver in Cleveland kept his pantry to 7 items by the middle of the month: 2 cans of chicken of the sea, a box of minute rice, a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom, a sleeve of saltines, evaporated milk, an onion, and a brick of government cheese. He chopped the onion, browned it in margarine, stirred in the rice, the soup, the milk, and a splash of water, then folded in the drained tuna and a handful of crumbled saltines. He grated the government cheese over the top and baked it covered for 30 minutes. The casserole came out hot and binding and quiet. It fed him for 3 nights. The pan went into the sink and stayed there until morning. If you ever lived alone, you know that the dishes wait. He had stopped washing them after dark when he stopped having a wife to tell about his day. Number 14, Sunday smothered chicken over rice. Some Sundays in our 1980s, kitchen smelled exactly like this dish from the moment your feet hit the kitchen linoleum. The whole fryer chicken cost $2.90 at the A&P in 1985, cut into 8 pieces by the butcher behind the counter who knew your grandmother by her first name. Each piece was patted dry with a paper towel, dusted in seasoned flour, heavy with paprika and black pepper, and dropped one at a time into a Dutch oven with a 1/4 inch of hot vegetable oil. The skin hissed and bubbled and turned the color of an October leaf. The smell that came off that pan was the smell of safety, the smell that told you Sunday dinner was real and the week was finally over. The browned pieces came out onto a plate. Half the oil was poured off. The remaining grease was loosened with 3 heaping spoons of flour, stirred into a roux the color of peanut butter. 2 cups of chicken broth went in slow, whisked until smooth, then a sliced yellow onion, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a pinch of thyme. The chicken pieces returned to the gravy. The lid went on. The whole pot simmered for 40 minutes on a low flame while the rice cooked in a separate pan and the greens finished on the back eye. The kitchen filled with steam that fogged up the window over the sink, the same window your grandmother had been looking out of for 30 years. A scoop of rice went onto the plate first. A piece of dark meat went on top. Gravy ladled over the rice until it pooled at the edge of the plate. A slice of hot water cornbread off to the side. The smell of paprika and onion and chicken fat hung in the kitchen until Monday morning. Sunday smothered chicken was the meal that proved a hard week ended in a soft place. The plate cost under $4 and tasted like a memory you could chew. Number 22, pinto beans and hot water cornbread. A bag of dried pintos at the Piggly Wiggly cost 23 cents in 1965, and that bag was a week of suppers for a widow with a single coil. She soaked a cup overnight in a coffee mug, drained them in the morning, and set them to simmer with a ham hock end and a halved onion. By supper time, the pot smelled like the back of her mother's kitchen in Tennessee. While the beans cooked, she stirred a half cup of meal with boiling water and a spoon of grease, patted out 2 flat cornbread cakes, and crisped them in the bean pot juice. Beans over the bread, hot sauce on top. Supper for a quarter, number 19, turkey necks and gravy. Turkey necks sat in the freezer section of every grocery store in the South, and almost nobody under 40 reached for them. They were bony, awkward, and cheap. Put 4 or 5 of them in the crock pot with an onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and a cup of water. By evening, the meat had pulled away from the bone in long, tender strips, and the liquid in the pot had turned into a dark, rich gravy without any flour or roux. The collagen did all the thickening. Shred the meat, pour the gravy over rice, and that was a supper that tasted like it took all day. Turkey necks carried the kind of flavor that lived in the parts of the animal everybody else walked past. Number 18, pork chops drowned in onion gravy. Thin cut, bone-in pork chops, the kind that came in a value pack at the grocery store, were designed for this. Season them, lay them flat in the pot, cover them with sliced onions, pour in a can of cream of mushroom soup mixed with a little water, and let the slow cooker do what it was made to do. After 6 hours, the chops were so tender they broke apart with a fork. The onions had melted into the gravy. The bones slipped right out. This was the supper that made a kitchen smell like a grandmother was home, even when the only person in the house was the one eating. A value pack of pork chops cost a few dollars and produced enough for 3 days of quiet, honest suppers. Salmon over grits was breakfast for the mornings when you woke up missing someone and needed a stove to keep your hands busy. Leftover canned salmon, flaked with a fork, warmed in a skillet with butter and black pepper, spooned over a bowl of slow-cooked grits, stone ground, the kind that took 30 minutes and required stirring every few to keep from sticking. You added butter and salt, and the grits turned thick and creamy, a perfect bed for the warm fish. Along the coasts of South Carolina and Georgia, fish over grits had been a gula geechee tradition for generations, with the catch changing by the morning. Inland, canned salmon substituted, cheap, always available, and shelf-stable. For a senior alone, salmon and grits took just long enough to prepare that the kitchen felt occupied again, the stove warm, the morning shaped by something other than silence. Peanut butter, quick bread, the Depression era, no yeast loaf, baked in a single small pan in under 30 minutes. Proved you didn't need a grocery run to have something warm in the morning, as long as you had flour, baking powder, milk, and a jar of peanut butter on the shelf. The recipe first appeared in the Five Roses cookbook of 1932, designed for households that had run out of eggs and yeast, and it spread quickly through African American communities across the South and North who were already practiced at making do. Mix dry and wet in one bowl, pour into a greased pan, bake at 350 degrees for 25 minutes. What came out was dense, slightly savory and filling, not sweet, not quite sandwich bread, but something in between that held you through the morning on 2 slices. Elders kept this recipe in their heads the way they kept all essential knowledge, not written, not shared unless asked, just there when it was needed. When the grocery money ran out 3 days before the check came, eggs and rice with tomato gravy kept the lights on inside the body. This was Depression-era arithmetic carried through generations of black kitchens. A dozen eggs for 30 cents in the 1940s, a cup of rice from a bulk sack, and a can of tomatoes that stretched across 2 meals. Rice cooked plain, eggs scrambled soft in a skillet with butter or bacon grease, pulled off the heat while still wet so they wouldn't turn rubbery. The tomato gravy came together in the same pan. Canned tomatoes crushed by hand, a little sugar to cut the acid, salt, and a spoonful of flour to thicken it. Everything went into one bowl. Eggs on rice, gravy over both. And for a few minutes, the kitchen smelled like someone was taking care of you, even if that someone was yourself. The old ones could tell by the color of the gravy whether it had been made with love or just made to get through. Nobody talked about this one at the family reunion, but everyone knew. And that was its value on a weekday morning when the stove wasn't warm. You laid out soda crackers on a plate and poured cane syrup over them in slow amber loops until each cracker pooled in sweetness, then ate them before they lost their snap. The whole pleasure was the contrast between the salt and the syrup's deep, dark sweetness. Cane syrup was a foundational pantry item in black Southern households, made from sugar cane juice cooked down into a thick, richly flavored syrup, sweeter than molasses but less bitter, far cheaper than refined sugar, and lasting months without refrigeration. It stretched across dozens of breakfasts, sweetening biscuits, hoe cakes, and cornbread, the same way jam sweetened toast in households that could afford jam. On mornings when nothing else was ready, and every household had those mornings, crackers and cane syrup was the answer. It cost almost nothing. It got you out the door. If crackers and cane syrup asked nothing, black-eyed peas carried luck and nourishment in every spoonful, cooked simply with onion, garlic, and smoked meat for flavor. Dried peas cost almost nothing and expanded into pots full of creamy goodness after hours of slow simmering. Seniors appreciated how forgiving this dish was. It could simmer unattended while they rested, filling the home with savory aromas. The peas provided protein and fiber, making them a complete meal when served over rice with hot sauce and cornbread. Leftovers kept well and improved overnight as flavors deepened. For those on fixed incomes, a bag of dried black-eyed peas meant multiple meals for mere dollars. The dish connected seniors to tradition, recalling New Year's celebrations and Sunday tables where these humble legumes symbolized prosperity and hope. The cast iron stove was never just for cooking, and every black grandmother in the 1960s understood this without having to say so. You started a pot of beans in the morning, not only because the family needed to eat, but because the stove needed to be burning. And a burning stove meant a warm kitchen, and a warm kitchen meant the whole back half of the house climbed a few degrees by noon. Women managing households on tight budgets in cities like Detroit and Cleveland had worked out a thermal logic no engineering firm had put on paper. Cook hot all day, keep the burners low but constant. Never let the stove go cold until everyone was in bed. Cast iron held heat long after the flame dropped. Turn the burner off at 9 and it was still radiating at midnight. What's been lost is not the knowledge exactly. It's the understanding that the stove was doing two jobs at once. She knew. She just never explained it because you were supposed to pick it up by being present. Stewed tomatoes and okra carried a lineage stretching back to West Africa, where okra, brought to the Americas inside the hulls of slave ships, had thickened soups and stews for centuries. In black kitchens of the 1970s, it cost pennies and fed the spirit like a feast. Fresh okra was sliced into rounds and fried first in a hot skillet until the slime cooked off and the edges crisped. That step separated the cooks who knew from the ones who did not. Canned tomatoes went in next, crushed with a wooden spoon, along with onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The pot simmered until the okra was tender and the tomatoes had thickened into a sauce that was tangy, savory, and rich. Served over rice, it was a full meal. Served alongside fried fish, it was a celebration. The women who grew that okra in their backyard plots knew exactly which pods to pick, no longer than a finger because anything bigger turned woody. That knowledge came from watching, not reading. Number 24, neck bones over yellow rice for one. She would buy a single pound of pork neck bones from the meat counter on Avenue D for 60 cents in 1979, just enough to fill a small Dutch oven with 2 pieces. The bones went in cold water with half an onion, 3 peppercorns, and a bay leaf, then sat at a low simmer for 3 hours while she watched her stories. The meat slid off the bone in tender, gelatinous threads, and the cooking liquid turned into a deep mahogany broth, heavy with marrow. She cooked white rice in some of that broth with a pinch of turmeric for color, which is where the yellow came from. One bowl held her over until noon the next day. The bones got picked clean by a thumb and forefinger over the sink, and the broth left over was tomorrow's gravy. A deacon's wife in West Memphis taught a whole block this trick. A single pot kept a woman alive and independent. Number 24, coffee-soaked bread. A cup of black coffee and a heel of day-old bread. You tore the bread into pieces, dropped them into the coffee, added a spoonful of sugar, and ate it with a spoon-like soup. In the Mississippi Delta, this was called SOP. In parts of Alabama, they called it coffee, bread. The coffee softened the bread into something porridge-like, warm and caffeinated enough to get a person moving back then. A pound of coffee cost 75 cents in 1964. A loaf of bread was 21 cents. Together, a week of breakfast for under $1. Nobody was proud of this recipe, but thousands of elderly black men and women ate this alone in quiet kitchens across the South, and they never told their children because admitting you ate bread soaked in coffee felt like admitting something larger about your life. Number 22, country fried steak with onion gravy. A cheap cut of round steak, pounded thin with the back of a skillet until it was tender enough to chew without good teeth. Seasoned, dredged in flour, fried in cast iron until golden. Then the steak came out and the gravy went in. Flour into the drippings, milk added slowly, onions softened until they disappeared into the sauce. Everything went back in, covered, and simmered. In 1990, a pound of round steak cost $1.89 on sale. A senior could cut 2 portions and freeze the second for later. The gravy stretched the meat, the onions stretched the gravy, and the whole meal, eaten with a slice of bread to soak up the drippings, cost less than $1. Black families in Texas and Oklahoma called this chicken fried steak without the chicken. It was Sunday night's quiet reward. Number 13, hog jowl with black coffee. A single thin slice of smoked hog jowl with a cup of strong black coffee was the breakfast of men who had to be at the mill or the field by sunrise. The jowl came from the cheek of the pig and cost almost nothing because most white grocery stores did not want it. In a soul food household, it was treasured. One slice in a hot pan rendered into smoky brown grease and curled up crisp at the edges. The coffee, boiled in a battered enamel pot and poured strong enough to stand a spoon in, washed it down. There was no toast, no eggs, no fuss. Just meat, fat, and heat in the belly with the smell of wood smoke still in the cured pork. Black families in the Carolinas and Tennessee mountain country ate this 6 days a week through the winter, and grandmothers swore it was what kept the men working past sundown without sitting down once. Number 14, hoe cakes and Johnny cakes. 2 ingredients, white cornmeal and boiling water. A pinch of salt if the cupboard was generous. A retired sleeping car porter in Southside Chicago mixed a cup of Aunt Jemima cornmeal with a cup of boiling water until the batter held together like wet sand, dropped it by the spoonful into a hot iron skillet greased with bacon fat, and pressed each cake flat with the back of the spoon. 3 minutes aside, the edges crisped, the middles stayed soft. He ate 4 hoe cakes with a smear of margarine and a cup of pot liquor from the greens pot. The whole supper cost about 14 cents. Your great-great-grandmother had cooked the same hoe cakes on a flat hoe over a fire in Mississippi in 1898. The hoe was gone. The recipe was not. A senior with 2 ingredients and 1 skillet was never out of supper. The math was older than you. Number 17, spaghetti with ground beef. Stretch 1 pound of ground chuck across 5 hungry mouths, and you have the math problem every working black mother solved every Thursday night in 1986. Half a pound of meat browned in a heavy pot with chopped yellow onion and green bell pepper. The grease drained off into an empty coffee can on the back of the stove. Then a can of generic store brand tomato sauce, a can of stewed tomatoes, a teaspoon of sugar to cut the acid, garlic powder, dried oregano if you had it on the spice rack, salt and pepper to taste. The sauce simmered low for 30 minutes while the cheap, thin spaghetti noodles boiled in a separate pot of salted water. A working mother of 3 in Cleveland could put this plate on the table in under 25 minutes flat after walking in from her second shift. With a slice of buttered white bread and a tall glass of red Kool-Aid, the whole supper came in under $3. Spaghetti night fed the family of 5 for under $3, exactly as your grandmother always promised it would. Number 15, hot plate red beans on a Tuesday. Down in the 7th Ward of New Orleans, Tuesday was wash day, and wash day meant red beans because the pot could mine itself on the coil while the wringer rolled. A senior could buy a pound of small red beans for 25 cents in 1969 and feed herself for 4 suppers running. She soaked the beans overnight in a chipped enamel basin, drained them at dawn, and set them on her burner with a smoked turkey wing instead of the pork her doctor had taken away. Half an onion, a stub of celery, 2 cloves of garlic, a bay leaf, 2.5 hours on low. The beans went creamy on their own, the wing meat falling off the bone into the pot liquor. She ladled them over a scoop of rice from yesterday's pan and ate them on the porch where the radio could reach. Tuesday supper, Wednesday lunch, and a saucer set aside for the neighbor across the hall. Number 14, smothered turkey legs. A smoked turkey leg was one of the most undervalued pieces of protein in the grocery store. It sat in a freezer case, wrapped in plastic, overlooked by anyone who had not grown up watching their grandmother pull one out and drop it into a pot without reading a single instruction. Season the turkey leg with salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and a pinch of smoked paprika. Lay it in the pot, cover it with sliced onions and a can of cream of mushroom soup thinned with half a can of water. Set it on low for 7 to 8 hours. By evening, the meat had pulled back from the bone and the connective tissue had dissolved into the gravy, thickening it into something rich and smooth. The apartment filled with the smell that made the hallway neighbors guess somebody had family visiting. Pull the meat off the bone in long, tender shreds and stir them back into the gravy. Serve it over rice or egg noodles or mashed potatoes, whatever was cheapest and closest at hand. The turkey leg gave up so much flavor that the gravy alone could have carried a supper without the meat. One smoked turkey leg produced enough shredded meat and gravy for 4 nights of eating. A woman living on a fixed check that arrived on the first and had to last until the next first did not need a recipe book for this. She needed a crock pot, a turkey leg, a can of soup, and the patience her mother had already taught her. The crock pot returned that patience as a plate of food every night for most of a week. Nobody called it meal planning. Nobody called it budgeting. It was called making do. And making do was something this country never thought to honor. Before there were bone broth trends, Black grandmothers were already sipping pot liquor from a coffee cup while standing at the stove. Pot liquor, the dark mineral-rich broth left behind after simmering greens for hours, was never thrown out. It held everything the collards or mustard greens had given up, along with the smoky depth of whatever pork seasoned the pot. Jackie Torrance, the African-American storyteller from North Carolina, remembered her grandmother making pot liquor from mustard greens, pinto beans, and potatoes, treating it like gravy poured over cornbread. Through the 1950s and 60s, elders used it as folk medicine. Warm pot liquor eased earaches and settled stomachs. For a woman alone, a cup of pot liquor was the simplest comfort there was. She had already cooked the greens. The broth was just sitting there. She poured it into the same cup she used for morning coffee, sat at the table and drank something that tasted like every Sunday she ever cooked for people who were no longer there to eat. Peanut butter on toast with a smear of leftover bacon drippings sounds like an accident, but in Black kitchens from the 1930s through the 60s, it was a calculated decision by women who understood how to build a filling breakfast out of almost nothing. Peanut butter, sold for roughly 10 cents a pound during the Depression and promoted nationwide by the Bureau of Home Economics as a cheap protein source after World War I, became a staple in African American pantries when meat was unaffordable. The dripping tin sat open on the counter, and spreading a thin layer across the peanut butter toast was natural. The salt cut through the sweetness, the fat extended the staying power. The whole thing came together in under 3 minutes. Together they kept you full until afternoon, and fullness was the point on mornings when work started before sunrise and lunch wasn't guaranteed until 2. Nobody planned it the first time. You did it because both things were there and it worked, and you never stopped. The dripping tin was always on the counter. Now nobody keeps a dripping tin. Turnip greens with turnips used every part of the vegetable, wasting nothing while delivering vitamins and fiber that aging bodies needed. The greens were washed carefully, chopped, and simmered with a ham hock or smoked turkey neck until tender and infused with smoky flavor. The turnip roots were peeled, cubed, and added to the pot, cooking until soft enough to mash against the roof of your mouth. The pot liquor that remained was as valuable as the greens themselves, rich with nutrients and perfect for sipping or soaking up with cornbread. For seniors on fixed incomes, a bunch of turnip greens with roots attached cost little yet provided multiple servings. The dish connected them to traditions where nothing edible was ever discarded, and every meal carried the wisdom of ancestors who knew how to make abundance from simplicity. Salmon got the reputation, but canned mackerel did the real work in kitchens where every dime had a job. But before the boxed things arrived, there was crackling bread, cornbread baked with bits of rendered pork skin folded directly into the batter, the same skin cooked down in a cast iron pot until it crisped into small, brown, intensely savory cracklings. You mixed them into cornmeal, water, salt, and soda, baked the whole thing in a heavy skillet, and what came out was dense, rich, and crackling studded, with a bottom crust nobody who grew up eating it ever forgot. Sorghum syrup finished it, and sorghum carried African roots, brought to the American South from West Africa in the early 17th century, where it was called Guinea corn and had been used as a primary sweetener and grain staple for generations before the first enslaved person reached this shore. Crackling bread cost almost nothing when the hog had already been rendered. You used what the butchering left behind. It disappeared when hog rendering days ended and the cracklings went with them. The last woman who made it right held knowledge about cast iron and rendered fat that has never been written down. Fried pork chops were the centerpiece of countless soul food suppers, requiring only a few ingredients but delivering deep satisfaction. Thin-cut chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in seasoned flour, then fried in a skillet until golden brown and crispy outside while staying juicy within. The rendered fat left in the pan became the base for gravy, stretching the meal even further. For seniors, pork chops were economical. A package contained several chops at a price far below beef, and the cooking was straightforward. The smell of pork frying brought back memories of family suppers and Sunday dinners. Served with rice and gravy, greens, or simply with bread, fried pork chops proved that simple cooking, done well, created meals worth remembering. Just by the way the candle flame moved when you held it close. A fireplace that wasn't in use was a hole in the house. That's how your grandmother thought about it. A direct channel between the warm air inside and the cold air outside. And if you didn't seal it, all the heat you'd spent coal or kerosene to build would simply rise out through the chimney all night while you slept. The solution was stuffing. Old rags, bundled newspapers, a worn-out sweater finally given a purpose, anything dense enough to break the airflow through the flue. You pushed it up as far as you could reach, packed it firm, but not so tight that you couldn't pull it out again when you needed the fireplace. Urban apartments with decorative fireplaces still breathe cold air through gaps around the damper unless you plug them. Your grandmother understood both sides. She used it when she had fuel and sealed it when she didn't, and the distinction kept the house warm either way. And nothing from that garden carried more summer pride than a mess of Crowder peas picked fresh with the snaps still on. Crowder peas were not black-eyed peas. They were darker, earthier, and they stained the pot liquor a deep purple brown. The snaps, tender young pods picked before the peas matured, When in whole, adding green brightness that dried peas never matched. Shelled on the porch in the evening, the work was shared between grandmothers, mothers, and children, and the rhythm of thumbs splitting pods was the soundtrack of July. Cooked with a ham hock, seasoned with salt and pepper and nothing else, Crowder peas with snaps lasted only as long as the garden produced. When the season ended, so did the peas. Today, you can find dried Crowder peas in some stores, but the snaps are gone and the porches are quieter. Thanksgiving was not about the turkey. Number 20, smothered chicken back with onion gravy. On a Tuesday in 1978 in Detroit, a widow living above a laundromat could buy a pack of 3 chicken backs for 40 cents, the cheapest cut in the case because most folks did not know what to do with them. She rinsed them, salted them, dredged each one in seasoned flour, then browned them in a black skillet with 2 tablespoons of lard until the skin turned mahogany. She pulled them out, threw a sliced onion into the pan drippings, stirred up the brown bits, poured in a cup of water, and dropped the backs back in to braise covered for 40 minutes. The meat between the bones pulled away in soft, dark, deeply seasoned shreds. 1 back per meal. 3 backs got her through Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday lunch, with the gravy left over for biscuits on Friday morning. A widow in Detroit knew how to make a 40-cent supper feel like a Sunday plate. Number 20, fried green tomatoes. Long before Hollywood turned the name into a movie, fried green tomatoes were a workday breakfast. When the garden produced more than a family could eat and frost was coming, mothers picked them green and sliced them thick. Each slice got dredged in cornmeal, then fried in bacon grease until crispy outside and soft inside. The contrast was the whole point. Crunchy coating, almost creamy tomato with a tartness that cut through the richness. A plate of fried green tomatoes with a biscuit and coffee cost nothing because the tomatoes came from the yard the way they used to in every household, and the cornmeal was already in the cupboard. Black families across Alabama and Mississippi made this 3 or 4 times a week during tomato season. Nobody photographed it. Nobody wrote it down. It was August, the tomatoes weren't ripe, and breakfast needed to happen. Number 20, fried okra and potatoes. In the deep South, okra grew in every backyard garden from June through October. You sliced it thin, diced the potato, and fried them together in cast iron with bacon grease until the okra turned crisp and the potatoes turned golden. A dusting of cornmeal kept the okra from getting slimy. That was it. The roots of okra traced directly to West Africa, where the plant had been cultivated for centuries before it crossed the Atlantic. For a senior with a garden, this meal was free. A pound of okra cost 49 cents in 1986 at the store. The bacon grease was saved from breakfast, sitting in the coffee can beside the stove. A retired nurse in Montgomery made fried okra and potatoes every Tuesday from May through September for 15 years. She said, summer had a taste. This was it. Number 20, sweet potato pancakes with sorghum. Leftover sweet potatoes from Sunday dinner almost always ended up on Tuesday's griddle, smashed into pancakes thick with sorghum syrup. The potatoes from Sunday got mashed cold with a fork, then mixed with a half cup of flour, 1 egg, and just enough buttermilk to loosen the batter. A small ladle poured the mix onto a hot, greased griddle, and the cakes came up orange-brown with crisp, lacy edges. The sorghum bottle sat on the table because it cost less than maple syrup and held more flavor in 1 spoon. Black families across the South kept a jug of sorghum on the shelf year-round, since 1 gallon could last from October planting to April plowing. The pancakes filled up a child fast, used food that would have gone bad by Wednesday, and tasted like dessert in the middle of a hard week. Number 19, spam and rice with onion gravy. A retired shipyard welder in Newport News kept a blue can of spam in his pantry the way other men kept the Bible. He sliced it thin, browned the slices until the edges blackened, then set them aside. In the same skillet, he sweated a yellow onion in the Spam fat, stirred in 2 spoons of flour, and poured in a cup of water and a spoon of kitchen bouquet. The gravy thickened in 3 minutes. He laid the Spam over a plate of Uncle Ben's rice and ladled the gravy over the top. A can of Spam ran 99 cents. The plate fed him twice. The Navy had served him SOS on a Tuesday in 1968. He still ate it on a Tuesday. Your body remembers the comfort that fed it longest. Number 22, sausage gravy over biscuits. Inside every black household kitchen in the South Carolina Low Country sat a tube of cheap breakfast sausage and a sleeve of canned biscuits from the dollar store cooler. The sausage went into a hot, heavy skillet first, broken up with the back of a wooden spoon, browned until the edges caught and the fat ran clear. 3 heaping spoons of flour were stirred into the drippings to make a quick roux. Then evaporated milk and water were added slow, whisked steady until the gravy thickened into a slow pouring river. The Pillsbury biscuits popped open from the can with a satisfying smack, baked off in 10 minutes, split with a knife while still steaming. Gravy ladled over the open biscuit until it ran off the plate onto the napkin. This breakfast carried black grandfathers to the steel mill at 5 in the morning and church mothers to choir rehearsal at 6 in the evening. The whole pan cost under $2 in 1986 and fed 4 hungry working people. Sausage gravy was Southern luxury at Southern black prices. Number 24, 3-night chicken neck broth. Here is the supper from the intro, the one that stretched a single chicken neck into 3 nights of broth. The butcher on Hastings Street in Detroit sold a bag of necks for 29 cents in 1969, but one neck alone could feed a widow for half a week if she knew the trick. She covered a single neck with 3 cups of water on the hot plate, dropped in a stub of celery, half an onion, and a pinch of poultry seasoning. She let it murmur for 40 minutes, then pulled the neck out and saved it in a saucer in the icebox. Monday night, she ladled the broth over crumbled cornbread. Tuesday, she boiled rice in what was left and called it dinner. Wednesday, she shredded the meat off the neck bone, dropped it back into the last cup of broth with a little flour gravy, and ate it over toast. 3 nights, 1 neck, 29 cents. That coil did the work 3 grown men in a kitchen could not. Number 17, sweet potato stew. Peel 2 or 3 sweet potatoes, cut them into chunks, and put them in the crock pot with a diced onion, a can of diced tomatoes, a spoonful of peanut butter, and a pinch of cayenne. Add water or broth and let it cook on low for 6 hours. By supper time, the sweet potatoes had broken down into a thick, slightly sweet stew that did not need a single piece of meat to feel complete. The sweet potato was a West African root that survived the Middle Passage and ended up in Southern kitchens where it became so ordinary that people stopped thinking about where it came from. A pot of this stew cost less than the gas to drive to a restaurant, and it filled the apartment with a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. The sound of a knife scraping down a cob of corn opened the whole ritual, and if you grew up in a black Southern kitchen, you knew the difference between cutting corn and scraping it. Cutting gave you kernels. Scraping gave you the milk, the starchy, sweet liquid trapped inside, and that milk was everything. You held the cob upright over a bowl and ran the back of the knife down hard, pressing out every drop of pulp and juice. Then it all went into a hot skillet with butter, bacon grease, salt, and pepper. It thickened as the starch released, becoming something between cream corn and savory pudding. This technique has roots in both indigenous and West African cooking traditions, where corn was worked for maximum yield. By the 1960s, as frozen and canned corn edged out fresh ears, Scratch-fried corn started slipping off weeknight tables. The women who still make it can judge the ripeness by pressing a thumbnail into a single kernel, and they learned that by watching, never from reading. Buckwheat pancakes made one at a time on a dry cast iron skillet, drizzled with sorghum molasses and folded in half. This was the breakfast Black grandmothers made when they wanted something that felt like a full meal without the production of a Sunday morning. Buckwheat flour thrived in poor soil and cost far less than wheat flour through the Depression years, making it a regular staple in African American farm kitchens across the 1930s and 40s. The batter was mixed in a single bowl: buckwheat, a pinch of salt, buttermilk, 1 egg, a half teaspoon of baking soda, and poured directly onto a skillet that had been heating dry. The dry heat method was the insider knowledge. Buckwheat's natural oils released clean from ungreased iron, and grease in the pan made the edges greasy instead of crisp. You watched for the bubbles to stop moving across the surface and flipped once. Folded around a line of sorghum, eat it at the stove. Done in 4 minutes. Nobody taught that in words. You stood next to her until you knew it. Vienna sausages, straight from the tin, were the dinner that happened when dinner didn't happen. When the legs were tired, the stove felt too far, and the body just needed something before bed. The small can popped open with a pull tab, and the pale little sausages sat in their broth like something between a meal and an apology. Eaten cold with saltines and a squirt of yellow mustard, or picked up with fingers one at a time, this was a dinner measured in silence. It cost 35 cents in the 1970s. It required nothing, no cooking, no plates if you didn't want one, no effort beyond pulling the tab. For seniors living alone in small apartments after their families moved away, this was Tuesday night and Wednesday and sometimes Friday. Nobody judged it out loud because everyone had a can in the cabinet. The people who ate Vienna sausages for dinner weren't ashamed. They were tired, and tired is its own kind of hungry. Egg went in last, and you had to know when. If the grits had stopped bubbling but were still steaming, that was the moment. You pressed the well into the center with the back of a spoon, cracked the egg directly in, covered the pot, and let the heat finish it. This was not a recipe from a card. It was knowledge held in hands that had been stretching a meal for generations, producing a full breakfast from 2 ingredients that cost less than a dime in the 1950s. Grits are among the oldest foods in African American kitchens, ground from hominy corn used in Native American nixtamalization, a process that unlocks nutrients plain grinding cannot release, and carried through Southern cooking from plantation quarters to city apartments. 1 pot, 1 flame, 1 dish to wash. For a woman living alone after her children had gone north, that economy mattered. The yolk broke when you pressed it and spread through the grits like a slow yellow sauce. Nobody makes it that way anymore. Oxtail stew turned one of the most affordable cuts at the meat counter into something that tasted luxurious and deeply satisfying. Oxtails were browned until caramelized, then braised for hours with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and seasonings until the meat fell off the bone and the marrow melted into rich, silky gravy. The collagen from the bones created body and richness that expensive cuts could never match. For seniors, oxtail stew was practical. Despite the long cooking time, it required little attention once the pot was on the stove, and one batch fed someone for days. The stew improved with each reheating as flavors continued to meld. Served over rice or with crusty bread for soaking up the gravy, oxtail stew proved that the cuts others overlooked held the deepest, most satisfying flavors. After the biscuits came out, after whatever had spent an hour in the oven finished the bacon, the door stayed cracked, not wide open, just a few inches, and the residual heat bled slowly into the kitchen for close to an hour afterward. This was deliberate. On cold mornings, when the kitchen was where everyone gathered before the rest of the house came up to temperature, the oven was the fastest heat source available, and a woman who had managed a cold house for 30 winters knew exactly how to use it. Homestead writers, going back generations, documented baking as a dual-purpose operation, feeding the family and warming the house at the same time. You didn't leave the oven on unattended. That was dangerous, and she knew that too. But the door cracked, the warm air rising in slow waves you could feel on your face if you stood close. That was free, and she never wasted free. Time equals 1 second / greater than the smell of pork chops frying on a Saturday could pull you in from 3 houses down. Thin bone-in chops seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, fried in Crisco until the crust turned dark gold and the edges curled crisp. The sandwich was simple. 1 chop laid flat on soft white bread, hit with hot sauce or mustard, topped with another slice, wrapped tight in wax paper. You ate it with your hands, the bread soaking up grease until it went translucent but never fell apart. Back then, fried pork chop sandwiches traveled to work in lunch pails, on road trips in paper bags, to the park where the grill was for show, but the real food came from the kitchen. Your father ate them cold at midnight, standing at the counter. Your mother made a dozen at a time. The chops cost less than $1 for a whole pack. The bread cost $0.25. The meal held a family together on nothing, and it tasted like everything. Now, if the pork chop sandwich was Saturday, number 18, hoe cake with cane syrup. Cornmeal, hot water, a shake of salt, and a flat pan over a low flame. That was the whole recipe. A widow in Macon, Georgia in 1980 made hoe cakes the way the people in the field used to make them, on the blade of a hoe held over coals. She poured the batter thin so each cake was about the size of her hand, browned each side until it crisped at the edges, then stacked 3 on a saucer. The cane syrup came out of a small Staines can she had nursed for 2 months. She poured a slow puddle of dark syrup over the top cake and ate them with a fork at the kitchen table, alone, with the radio on low playing gospel from WIBB. The whole supper cost about 12 cents. 3 whole cakes filled her up better than a fast food sandwich, and the syrup gave her enough sugar to make it to morning without the shakes. It was a hug in a bowl. Number 15, tomato gravy over biscuits. Not tomato sauce, tomato gravy. You started with bacon drippings in a skillet, added flour, and stirred until it browned, then poured in a can of stewed tomatoes and let it simmer until it thickened into a chunky, savory gravy, somehow both sweet and smoky. Pour it over a split biscuit, and you had a breakfast that tasted like a southern garden and a smokehouse having a conversation. This was a staple in Black households across Alabama and Mississippi, especially in months when canned tomatoes were the only fruit in the cupboard. A can cost 12 cents. The drippings and flour were already there. For a senior on a fixed income, this required almost no shopping and used ingredients that kept for months. Modern food writers call it a forgotten classic. It was never forgotten by the people who needed it. Number 17, fried catfish with skillet. Cornbread, a catfish fillet dusted in seasoned cornmeal and fried in cast iron until the crust crackled. When the fish came out, you poured cornbread batter right into the same skillet with the drippings still hot. The cornbread baked on the stovetop, covered, soaking up every trace of catfish flavor. In the Delta, this was Friday night. A pound of catfish cost $1.29 in 1992. A retired bus driver named Clarence Hayes in Greenville ate this every Friday for 9 years. He caught the catfish himself from an oxbow lake. He said the skillet remembered his wife's seasoning. He said, Cornbread tasted better in her pan than in any new one. That was not superstition. That was 60 years of a woman's cooking baked into the iron. Number 16, mush and molasses. The cheapest thing a sharecropper's wife could put on a plate in 1962 was a bowl of hot cornmeal mush with a spoon of dark molasses cut through the middle. The math told the whole story. Cornmeal at 18 cents for 5 pounds, molasses at 50 cents a quart, and 1 pot of water from the well. That bowl of breakfast worked out to less than 2 cents per serving, and it filled up a grown man until dinner. The mush got stirred slow for 15 minutes so it stayed smooth, then poured into a wide bowl while still steaming. The molasses sank down to the bottom in dark ribbons, and the spoon caught a little of both with every bite. Tenant farming families across Arkansas and Mississippi ate this 6 mornings a week for most of the decade. It was the food of people who counted every coin, but the warmth of it kept whole households going through the coldest months of the year. Number 17, smothered pork chops with rice and gravy. End-cut pork chops ran 89 cents a pound at the Piggly Wiggly in 1984, and a grandmother in Atlanta bought 4 of them on a Tuesday because Tuesday was when she let herself remember what Sunday used to taste like. She seasoned the chops with Lawry's, dredged them in flour, and browned them hard in Crisco until the bottom of the pan went brown and sticky. She lifted the chops out, sweated a chopped onion in the drippings, stirred in 3 spoons of flour, and poured in a cup of water and a splash of evaporated milk. The gravy turned the color of pecan shells. She nestled the chops back in, covered the pan, and let it simmer 40 minutes on the lowest flame, a pot of rice on the back burner, your Sunday supper on a Tuesday. She set 2 plates out of habit. She ate from one and said grace anyway. Number 8, sweet potato pie. The bag of sweet potatoes from the produce aisle cost under $1 in 1986, and 1 5-pound sack baked off 2 whole pies for the Sunday supper table. The potatoes roasted in the oven for an hour until the skins blistered and the flesh inside turned to soft orange custard with a sweet smell that carried into the living room. The peels slid off in your fingers. The pulp went into a mixing bowl with brown sugar, evaporated milk, 2 eggs, a heavy shake of cinnamon and nutmeg, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a pat of melted butter. Whipped smooth with a hand mixer, the filling poured into a frozen pie shell from the freezer case. 45 minutes in a moderate oven set the custard and browned the top. A pie cost under $2 to make and served 8 at the church fellowship hall. Sweet potato pie was the dessert that ended every Sunday supper. Number 18, buttermilk and cornbread crumble. A quart of cultured buttermilk cost 29 cents at the dairy case in 1970, and a senior with leftover cornbread could turn it into supper in under 3 minutes on the coil. She warmed the buttermilk in a small pan, just enough to take the chill off, never boiling because boiling broke it into curds. She crumbled day-old cornbread into a tall iced tea glass, poured the warm buttermilk over the top, and ate it with a long-handled iced teaspoon while she sat by the window. Black field hands from the Mississippi Delta carried this supper north into the cities during the Great Migration and never let it go, even when they could afford richer suppers. For a widow with no teeth left for chewing tough meat, the warm bread softened into a comfort that felt like her mother's hand on her back. 3 cents of bread, 7 cents of buttermilk, and a memory served warm in a tall glass on a Tuesday night. Number 7, catfish stew. Catfish was the fish of the South, pulled from rivers and ponds and farm-raised in Mississippi Delta fields where cotton used to grow. In a crock pot, it became a stew that rivaled anything a coastal restaurant charged 10 times the price for. Cut catfish, fillers into chunks. In the crock pot, layer diced potatoes, a diced onion, canned diced tomatoes, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, garlic, salt, pepper, a bay leaf, and a pinch of cayenne. Lay the catfish pieces on top so they cooked gently in the steam rather than falling apart at the bottom. Set it to low for 4 hours, no more. Catfish did not need the long cook that beef and pork demanded. It was a delicate fish inside a patient pot, and the trick was knowing when to stop. By supper time, the potatoes were tender, the tomatoes had melted into a broth, and the catfish had broken into soft white flakes that dissolved on the tongue. The liquid tasted like the river, and the garden had met in the same pot and decided to stay. Catfish stew was the Friday supper in households that observed the old rules about meat and the end of the week. But for a senior living alone, Friday was no different from any other night, and this stew showed up whenever the crock pot was empty and a bag of frozen catfish fillets sat in the freezer. A pound of farm-raised catfish, a couple of potatoes, a can of tomatoes, and an onion. The total cost was less than a fast food meal, and it produced a pot of stew that lasted through the weekend without losing its flavor. The people who grew up eating catfish pulled from a creek behind the church never needed a magazine to tell them it was worth cooking. They already knew. The crock pot just let them keep making it after the creek had dried up and the church had closed its doors. In the end, the last comfort food was the first one. A cup of coffee and a biscuit at the same table where she once fed everyone she loved. The coffee was strong, made in a percolator or a drip machine with sugar and a little milk the way she always took it. The biscuit she made from memory, flour, baking powder, salt, a little lard, buttermilk added until the dough felt right. She never measured. She never had to. It came out golden and split open with warm steam, and she ate it slow with her coffee while the morning was still new. The big pots sat on the top shelf. The chairs were pushed in, but her hands moved through the flour the way they always had, and the biscuit tasted the way it always tasted. And for the few minutes it took to eat, the table felt less large. That was enough. Some mornings, that had to be enough. A soft-boiled egg with vinegar and saltines was lost the moment people stopped cooking eggs by feel. In African American kitchens from the 1940s through the 60s, a grandmother cooking for one lowered her egg into simmering, not boiling, simmering, water and counted in her head. 4.5 minutes for a yolk that was set at the edge and still creamy at the center. She peeled it, sliced it in half, and hit it with 3 drops of apple cider vinegar before it went to the plate with 6 saltines fanned around the edge. The vinegar cut the richness and turned the whole plate savory rather than bland. She arrived at it through years of cooking for herself after the house emptied out, adjusting the same egg she'd always made until it was exactly what she wanted. The timer never learned that. Neither did anyone who came after her. It had earned a permanent spot in black kitchen cabinets across the country. Fried Spam and eggs took 5 minutes and cost almost nothing. The can sat on the shelf for months, needing no refrigeration, ready whenever the body needed feeding. The Spam was sliced thick and fried in a dry skillet until the edges crisped and the fat rendered, turning the pale pink meat golden and salty. Eggs went into the same pan fried in the Spam, grease until the whites set and the yolks stayed soft. Eaten on a plate with white bread to soak up the runny yolk, this carried more protein than most dinners, twice its price. Seniors who kept Spam in the pantry weren't nostalgic for wartime. They were practical. A can cost under 50 cents and fed one person twice. The ones who fried it best knew to slice it thin. Thick slices stayed soft in the middle and never got that crust that made it worth eating. Callous were rice fritters, sold on the streets of New Orleans' French Quarter, by black women who carried them in covered bowls on their heads, calling out "Bel Kalas, Tu Show, Beautiful Kalas, all hot." The name came from the Nupe word kara, meaning fried cake, carried to Louisiana by enslaved West Africans from rice-growing regions of West Africa who adapted their knowledge of rice cooking to the new country. You made the batter the night before, cooked rice mixed with yeast and left to proof overnight, then combined in the morning with eggs, sugar, flour, cinnamon, and nutmeg before being spooned into hot oil and fried golden. Under Spanish colonial rule, some enslaved black women used the money from selling kalas on Sundays, the one day they had off, to purchase their own freedom. The dish appeared in the 1901 Picayune's Creole Cookbook. After World War II, it slipped from the streets and then from the kitchens. The women who sold kalas were gone long before the recipe nearly followed them. Chicken and rice was the one-pot meal that stretched a single chicken into days of eating. Chicken pieces were browned, then simmered with onion, celery, garlic, and seasonings until nearly done. Rice was added directly to the pot, absorbing all the flavorful cooking liquid as it cooked. The result was tender chicken atop rice infused with savory goodness, each grain separate yet rich with chicken essence. For seniors, this dish was practical. One pot meant minimal cleanup, and the cooking required little active attention. A whole chicken or package of thighs cost just a few dollars and fed someone for most of a week. The dish reheated well and could be varied with different seasonings or vegetables depending on what was on hand. Chicken and rice was dependable comfort that never disappointed. Rolling old towels and worn-out coats into a tight cylinder and pressing them against the bottom of the front door was so common in 1960s black households that you almost didn't notice it anymore. It was just there, the way the rug was there or the coat hooks were there. A quarter-inch gap under an exterior door in a Chicago winter could drop a room's temperature by 10 degrees overnight, and most of the row houses and tenements that black seniors occupied had gaps like that because nobody was coming to fix them, and landlords in red-line neighborhoods counted on tenants not knowing their options. The draft snake was stationed at every door leading to the outside or to an unheated room. When the wind picked up, you could feel it pressing against the cloth from the other side. The coat you rolled up was always the one too warm to wear out anymore, so it kept working. In the 1970s, pig ear sandwiches were sold at juke joints, neighborhood bars, and roadside stands across the Black South, and the people who ate them did not apologize. The ears were cleaned, boiled for hours until the cartilage softened, then sliced thin and either pickled in spiced vinegar or deep fried until the edges went crisp. Served on white bread with hot sauce, mustard, and dill pickles. The sandwich had a texture nothing else matched. Crunchy where the fat rendered, tender where the meat pulled apart, tangy from the vinegar. The dish came from the nose-to-tail tradition that had fed black families since slavery, when the ears, feet, and tails were the only cuts passed down to the quarters. At places like the original Cozy Corner in Memphis or Nameless stands in the Mississippi Delta, a pig ear sandwich and a cold drink was Saturday night. Today, those stands are mostly gone. The ears are still cheap, but the hands that slow cooked them have moved on. Number 23, salt pork and turnip greens, single pot. Frying off a 2-inch chunk of salt pork until the edges curled and the fat ran clear was how every greens dinner started in a small kitchen in Itta, Mississippi in 1976. The greens, washed 3 times in the sink because grit hides under that ribbon of leaf, went in next, still wet from rinsing. They hit the hot pork fat and steamed themselves down to a quarter of their original size. A senior cooking for one used half a bunch, never the whole. She would add a splash of cane vinegar at the end and let the whole thing cook covered for 40 minutes until the greens were silky and the pot liquor at the bottom turned black-green. One bowl that night, the second bowl over rice tomorrow, the pork chunks sliced thin for a sandwich on day 3. The greens fed her 3 meals, and her blood pressure thanked her by Thursday. That was enough. Number 14, spoon bread. Edna Lewis, the legendary black chef from Freetown, Virginia, wrote about loving spoon bread as a child. It wasn't bread at all, but a souffle made from cornmeal, milk, and butter, eggs, beaten until light and baked until it puffed golden and trembling. You ate it with a spoon because it was too soft to slice. In the 1960s, spoon bread was a Sunday morning dish in Virginia and the Piedmont. It required more eggs than most breakfasts, making it special. But seniors who kept chickens had eggs every day, and for them, spoon bread was an ordinary Tuesday. Cornmeal cost pennies. Eggs came from the yard. The technique was everything. You had to beat the batter long enough to incorporate air and know your oven well enough to pull it at the right moment. Grandmothers who made spoon bread never wrote the recipe down because the recipe was in their hands. Number 25, hot water cornbread and greens. This was the meal that started with a handful of cornmeal and ended with a full belly. You mix cornmeal with boiling water, a pinch of salt, and a little sugar if you had it. Then you drop spoonfuls into a hot skillet with oil and fry them golden and crisp on the outside, soft on the inside. While the cornbread drained, you wilted greens in the same skillet with vinegar and red pepper flakes. 10 minutes, 2 ingredients. In Alabama, black women had been making hot water cornbread for 100 years before Abby Fisher's cookbook documented it. A bag of cornmeal cost 39 cents in 1985. Turnip greens from the garden were free. For a senior living alone, this was supper when the cupboard was nearly bare. You did not need a recipe, you needed a skillet and a memory. Number 22, sunrise skillet grits with pan drippings. The Sunrise Kitchen in a 1960s soul food household ran on one rhythm, and grits with pan drippings was its first sound. Water went into the heavy pot before anyone else was awake. Once it rolled, a slow handful of stone, ground white grits got stirred in with a long wooden spoon, and the pot sat at the back of the stove for almost an hour. Right before plating, a tablespoon of bacon drippings from the coffee can on the counter went straight into the bowl. That spoonful turned a plain breakfast into something that tasted like the meat from the night before without costing 1 extra cent. The bowl came to the table with the rim of the spoon already buried, and most people did not look up until the bowl was clean. That spoonful of saved drippings is what we still call the soul of soul food, one quiet ingredient carrying the memory of every meal that came before it. Number 21, hot dogs and beans, the Vienna sausage variant. A grandmother in Cincinnati could not always afford a pack of ballpark franks at $1.29. When your check came up short, you reached for the small can. She opened a can of Armour Vienna sausages, drained the brine, sliced them into coins, and stirred them into a pot of Bush's pork and beans with a tablespoon of yellow mustard and a spoon of Domino brown sugar. The whole pot took 15 minutes. She ate it from a chipped Corelle bowl with a square of Jiffy cornbread on the side. Her grandsons called it puppy bowls because the sausage rounds looked like they had been scooped from a tin of dog food. They ate 3 helpings each. She never corrected them. Your pot was empty before the Andy Griffith rerun ended. Number 15, chicken backs and rice. Across every black-owned grocery store in the South in 1985, the meat case held a styrofoam tray of chicken backs marked at 39 cents a pound. Most white customers walked past them. Most black customers loaded 2 trays into the cart and knew exactly what they were doing. The backs went into a heavy pot with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and just enough water to cover. 45 minutes of slow boiling pulled the meat off the bones and turned the cooking water into a rich amber stock. The stock was strained and used to cook a pot of long grain rice. The meat was picked off, mixed back in. A whole pan of supper for a family of 4 came in at under $1.50. Chicken backs were the secret cut nobody wrote about, but everybody ate. Number 20, hot plate sweet potato. A pound of sweet potatoes at the Saturday Curb Market in Charleston ran 15 cents in 1966, and 1 fat potato was a senior's whole supper. She did not have an oven in her rooming house, but she had that coil. She cut the potato into 4 thick rounds, set them in a small black pan with a 1/2 inch of water and a pat of margarine, covered the pan with a saucer, turned upside down, and let it steam on low for 20 minutes. The water boiled off and the bottoms caramelized in the leftover margarine until the edges were the color of dark honey. She mashed it on her plate with a fork, sprinkled brown sugar from a Save packet, and ate it with a spoon. Sweet, hot, and filling for a nickel and change. Number 20, stewed rutabagas with salt pork. Rutabagas were the vegetable that sat in the produce section, looking like a waxed turnip that nobody recognized anymore. But in the rural South, they were a winter staple. Peel them, cut them into chunks, and drop them into the crock pot with a piece of salt pork, an onion, a little sugar to round the edges, salt, and enough water to barely cover. 6 hours on low turned them soft and sweet with a slight mustard bite underneath. The salt pork melted into the broth and gave the whole pot a smoky richness that no amount of butter could imitate. A single rutabaga cost less than $1 and weighed enough to fill half the pot on its own. For a senior living alone, that was 3 nights of supper from 1 ugly root and a scrap of cured pork. Beef tips and rice asked for patience, and in return gave you something that tasted like it took all day, because it did. You started with the cheapest stew meat, usually chuck cut into cubes or trimmed at home from whatever tough cut was on sale. The meat got seared in a hot pot until dark brown on every side, then pulled out while you built the base. Onions, celery, garlic, a bay leaf, flour made a roux, broth went in, and the beef returned to simmer low for hours until each piece fell apart at the touch of a fork. The gravy thickened, dark and glossy. Over white rice, this was the kind of meal that made a small kitchen feel like a real home. In the 1950s and 60s, beef tips were a common Sunday alternative to chicken, and households watching every dollar. A senior alone could stretch 1 pot across 3 evenings, and the last bowl was always the richest. Canned salmon stirred over single-serving grits was what happened when the pantry held a can of pink salmon and a cup of dry grits and nothing else that made sense for morning. And what happened was, without planning, a complete breakfast that held a woman alone through half the day. The grits cooked in salted water, 4 minutes of stirring while the salmon was drained and broken up with a fork in the tin. When the grits were thick and pulling away from the pan, the salmon went in directly, no second pot, and was stirred through in slow circles until it disappeared into the grain. Black pepper, a splash of hot sauce if she had it. Canned salmon had been a soul food staple since before the Great Migration, when Black Southerners learned to stretch protein through long weeks between paydays. The combination was never on a menu anywhere. It was just what you did when those 2 things were left in the cabinet. The butter hit the hot iron first, then the corn, and the sizzle told you everything about how the next 5 minutes would go. Fried corn in a skillet started in the garden and ended on a plate still steaming. Fresh corn was cut from the cob with a sharp knife, the blade scraping afterward to release the milky starch that made it creamy without cream. In winter, canned corn worked, drained and dried so it wouldn't spatter. Into the skillet with butter or bacon grease, salt, pepper, and a pinch of sugar to pull the sweetness forward. 3 or 4 minutes until the edges brown and caramelized, sugars turning golden, butter going nutty, the kitchen filling with a smell sweet enough to make you forget you were eating alone. For Black seniors in the rural South, fried corn was often the entire meal, a skillet's worth, maybe with bread, eaten at a table set for one. The grease tin sat on the back of the stove, and everyone knew not to touch it without a reason. Bacon grease was saved after every frying, poured through a strainer into a metal can, kept at room temperature, used for seasoning cast iron, starting gravy, and frying the next morning's bread. On mornings when the pantry was light, it went onto a slice of bread. You spread it right to the edges, either ate it cold with coffee or ran it under the broiler until the fat melted in and the edges crisped. Either way, it tasted rich and smoky in a way bread only tastes when animal fat has entered it. Saving bacon grease was not just frugality, it was a philosophy. Nothing in the African American kitchen was more fundamental than the idea that what was rendered from the hog belonged to the cook and would be honored by using every last drop. That practice is nearly gone. She knew its value without ever naming it. Crackers and cane syrup required almost no thought and almost no effort. Creamed corn brought sweetness and comfort to the table using either fresh ears or frozen kernels that cost almost nothing. The corn was cooked with butter, milk, or cream, a touch of sugar, and seasonings until it became a thick, luscious side dish that children and elders alike found irresistible. Some cooks added flour to thicken it further, while others let the corn's natural starches do the work. For seniors living alone, creamed corn provided vegetables in a form that was easy to eat and digest. It paired well with nearly everything: fried fish, pork chops, chicken, or simply eaten with cornbread as a simple supper. A bag of frozen corn transformed into several servings of this comforting dish, stretching grocery dollars while delivering both nutrition and the kind of homemade taste that reminded you someone cared. And that meant closing the door on everything you couldn't afford to warm. The back bedroom, nobody used, got sealed in October and didn't open again until March. The dining room, if the family ate in the kitchen anyway, became dead space, unheated, sealed off, a cold buffer between the warm rooms and the exterior wall. This was not a desperate measure. It was logic that predated central heating by centuries, and people who had managed cold houses across generations understood it by instinct. A smaller volume of air is easier to heat and easier to hold. Every square foot you removed from circulation was fuel you didn't have to spend. The women who ran these households made these calculations every fall, deciding which rooms were essential and which were luxuries they couldn't afford until spring. The closed door was the cheapest insulation technology in the house. They used it with precision. Dirty rice earned its name from how it looked, flecked brown and gray from chopped chicken livers, and gizzards stirred through every grain. And anyone from a Louisiana kitchen knew the dish by sight before they tasted it. The livers were sautéed fast until firm but still pink, then chopped fine alongside gizzards simmered tender for an hour. The Holy Trinity, onion, celery, bell pepper, went in next, diced small and cooked in rendered fat until soft. Cooked rice was folded in with green onion, garlic, cayenne, and a splash of Worcestershire nobody measured. By the 70s, dirty rice showed up at reunions, holiday tables, and Friday suppers alongside fried fish. It was never the centerpiece and did not need to be. It made everything else on the plate make sense, and the cook who got the seasoning right never had to ask if people liked it. The empty pot answered. Number 25, hot water cornbread with bacon grease. The smell of pork fat hitting yellow meal could fill a one-bedroom apartment in West Memphis faster than any radio could. A retired domestic worker living alone in 1981 kept a tin can of bacon drippings on the back of the stove, the way her mother had in the sharecropping years. She would scoop 2 tablespoons of meal into a bowl, pour boiling water over it, stir until it pulled together, then drop a flat patty into a hot skillet glossed with that saved grease. 6 minutes aside, 1 patty made a meal, 2 patties made supper with greens. She ate it standing at the counter most nights because the table only mattered on Sundays. The whole thing cost about 9 cents to make in $1981, and it tasted like the kitchen she grew up in when her grandmother stretched a pound of meal across a whole week. Your grandmother called it supper. Number 25, 1 egg stretched 5 ways. In a household where 7 people needed breakfast and the icebox held 3 eggs, a mother in Birmingham cracked 1 egg into leftover rice, stirred it through, then fried the whole thing in bacon grease until the rice turned golden and the egg disappeared into every grain. Other mothers scrambled 1 egg into a pot of grits, letting the heat set it into thin ribbons of protein hiding in plain sight. Some beat an egg into flour and water to make a thin pancake that covered a plate and fooled a child into thinking they had gotten their fair share. In 1962, a dozen eggs cost 54 cents. Each egg was less than 5 cents. 5 cents between a child eating protein and a child eating nothing. Generations of black mothers did not have cookbooks for this. They had arithmetic and love, and those 2 things could make 1 egg feel like a feast. Number 24, chicken fried rice. This was not the kind you ordered from a takeout window. This was the kind a grandmother in Oakland made on a Wednesday night with yesterday's rice and a chicken thigh that cost 35 cents. She diced the chicken, fried it until it browned, pushed it aside and scrambled an egg in the same pan. The cold rice went in. Next, tossed with soy sauce and whatever was in the crisper. Half an onion, a handful of frozen peas. 10 minutes and the skillet smelled like a restaurant but cost less than $1. During the 1970s, black families in Oakland, Chicago, and Detroit adopted fried rice from Chinese American restaurants in their neighborhoods. Yesterday's leftovers became tonight's supper. That was the whole point. Number 25, fried cornmeal mush with cane syrup. For most black families in 1960, the morning started with a pot of yesterday's mush sliced into squares. The rule was simple. Cook a heavy pot of cornmeal on Sunday night, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it set in the icebox until it was firm enough to slice. By Monday morning, a 1/4-inch slab hit the hot grease and crisped up dark brown on both sides. A spoon of cane syrup or molasses went over the top, and that was breakfast for a working man or a school child. Cornmeal sold for about 18 cents for a 5-pound sack in 1960, which meant a family could eat from that 1 bag for almost 2 weeks. Nothing got thrown away. The crumbs that fell off the cutting board went into the chicken bucket on the back porch. Number 13, fried green tomatoes at the end of summer. The last green tomatoes hung on the vines in late September, too cold to ripen, too good to waste. A grandmother in Birmingham picked them, sliced them a 1/4-inch thick, salted them, and let them sweat on a paper towel for 10 minutes. She dredged each slice in seasoned cornmeal and pan-fried them in bacon grease until the cornmeal went bronze and the inside went tender. 3 minutes aside, she ate 6 slices with a piece of Wonder Bread and a glass of buttermilk. Free if she grew them. 20 cents a pound at the curb market if she did not. If you ever stood at the screen door waiting for the smell, you know this kind of supper was the cheapest kind of joy. The garden told her what supper was. The skillet did the rest. Number 12, smothered cabbage with smoked turkey wing. Cabbage was 19 cents a pound in 1985, and a smoked turkey wing ran about $1.50. A grandmother in Detroit dropped the wing into a heavy pot with 4 cups of water and let it simmer an hour until the broth turned smoky and the meat fell off the bone. She pulled the wing out, shredded the meat back into the pot, and added a head of cabbage chopped rough, a yellow onion, a teaspoon of red pepper flakes, and a spoon of Crisco. 40 minutes covered on a low flame. The cabbage went silky. The pot lacquer went gold. She served it over a scoop of Uncle Ben's rice with a square of Jiffy cornbread on the side. The whole pot fed her 4 nights. She froze 2 portions. For the weekend, her grandson came up from Memphis. Smoked turkey was the late 70s adjustment after the price of a ham hock had climbed past your budget. The flavor stayed. The bone changed. Number 10, collard greens with salt pork. 3 bunches of fresh collard greens from the Saturday morning farm stand cost $1.50 in 1985 and filled one of our brown paper sacks taller than a gallon of milk. The leaves were washed 3 times in cold sink water to chase out the grit, stripped off the tough center stem, stacked and rolled and sliced into thick green ribbons. A chunk of salt pork the size of a deck of cards went into the pot first, rendered down over a low flame until the kitchen smelled like a smokehouse on a winter morning. The greens piled in by the handful, wilted down, covered with water, hit with crushed red pepper, a splash of cider vinegar, and a long shake of black pepper. 2 hours later, the pot liquor turned dark amber and the leaves went silky. A working grandmother in rural Alabama poured the pot liquor into a coffee cup and drank it like medicine. Collard greens were the supper that drank like a tonic. Number 17, onion and egg, skillet. When the icebox was bare, except for 2 eggs and half a yellow onion, a senior could still set a real supper on the coil. She sliced the onion thin and dropped it in a hot skillet with a teaspoon of bacon grease from the can on the counter. The onion went translucent and brown around the edges, sweet enough to almost taste like jam. She cracked the 2 eggs right on top of the onions, let the whites set, and broke the yolks with her fork so they ran into the onion gold. Supper from the bottom of the icebox, ready in 7 minutes, eaten standing at the counter with a piece of light bread folded in half, 6 cents on a. Number 12, tomato rice with smoked ham. A can of diced tomatoes, a cup of long grain rice, a chunk of leftover smoked ham, and enough chicken broth to cover it all. That went into the crock pot in the morning, and by afternoon, the rice had absorbed the broth and turned pink from the tomatoes and salty from the ham. Season it with salt, pepper, a pinch of sugar to cut the acid, and a dash of hot sauce. Children in the South called this red rice, and it showed up when there was almost nothing else in the house. A bowl of it with a slice of white bread on the side was a full meal. The whole pot cost less than the gas to drive anywhere and fed 1 person for 3 days running. Here's the part of this story that the people watching already know. The ingredients that made these suppers possible were cheap because nobody else wanted them. Neck bones, pigtails, turkey necks, gizzards, ham hocks, the throwaway parts, the cuts that butchers used to sell for pennies because mainstream American kitchens had no use for them. Black cooks turned those scraps into a cuisine. They braised them, stewed them, slow cooked them for hours until the collagen turned to silk and the flavor deepened past anything a premium cut could deliver. And then the food world discovered them. Restaurants put oxtails on tasting menus next to truffle oil. Food magazines ran features on the beauty of slow-cooked collagen. Prices climbed until the very people who invented these recipes could no longer afford the ingredients. The crockpot suppers on this list were born from the ingenuity of people who had almost nothing. The cruel part is that almost nothing keeps getting more expensive. Some evenings, the refrigerator held nothing but leftover gravy from 2 nights before and cold rice on the back of the stove, and that became supper. Rice and gravy warm for one. You scoop rice into a bowl, ladled on whatever gravy remained, brown from hamburger steak, white from breakfast sausage, dark drippings from a roast already gone, and heated it together until the rice softened and absorbed the sauce. This was the meal at the bottom of the week, when everything before it had been eaten and payday was still days away. It was not a recipe, it was a condition, and yet it tasted like comfort because the gravy remembered what it came from and the rice held it the way a body holds warmth. Women who grew up during the Depression never wasted gravy. They saved it in jars and cups in bowls covered with saucers. Throwing it out was the same as throwing out the labor. When she warmed the bowl at dusk, she was eating everything she had ever made, condensed into one last serving. Before she opened a single cabinet, you could smell the stewed prunes in the small pot on the back burner, which meant she'd been up since before sunrise, moving quietly through the kitchen while the house was still dark. Stewed prunes over an open biscuit were the breakfast that told you someone had been up at 5, working, feeding herself with the same care she'd given everyone else for decades. Dried prunes simmered in water with a strip of lemon peel and a spoon of sugar until they swelled fat and the liquid thickened. She started them first, so they were ready by the time the biscuit split. In Depression-era Black households, dried prunes were one of the cheapest fruits available year-round, and elders understood what researchers have confirmed. They stabilized digestion and sustained energy through long mornings when heavier food sat wrong. She didn't call it nutrition, she called it breakfast. The biscuit soaked up the syrup from the bottom and the prune sat on top, soft and dark. You ate it with a spoon like something precious.
Pinto bean cakes were genius in their simplicity. Leftover beans from last night's pot were mashed, mixed with flour and onions, and fried until golden brown. What had started as scraps became something new, something delicious. The cakes were crisp at the edges and soft in the center, hearty enough to stand on their own or to sit beside rice or greens. It was a meal made by hands that refused to waste, by people who understood that nothing in the kitchen should ever be thrown away. The scent of frying bean cakes was homely and warm, a small reward for hard work. Each bite tasted of thrift, resourcefulness, and quiet pride. It was proof that survival could be creative, and that good cooking never depended on wealth, only wisdom. The sound of the pan crackling was the sound of resilience itself. A sprinkle of salt, a turn of the spatula, and the world felt right again. Served with hot sauce or ketchup, they turned into a feast from the plainest of ingredients. Bean cakes taught children early on that waste was not an option, and that love could be fried up right alongside supper.
Corn pone was not cornbread. No eggs, no leavening, no buttermilk, just cornmeal, water, and salt pressed into thick rounds and baked on the skillet until the outside formed a thin, crisp crust and the inside stayed dense in the way only water and cornmeal can. The technique came directly from enslaved communities where ash cakes and pone were the most fundamental corn preparations. What Dr. Martha Barenda, director of the Blanchard House Museum of African History and Culture in Punta Gorda, Florida, identified as rooted in the West African relationship with grain carried intact through every generation that followed emancipation. In the mornings, you reheated a piece from the day before in the same skillet where the fatback had fried, so the pone soaked up the drippings and developed a brown, greasy, savory bottom crust. You broke it into a bowl and poured warm, rendered fatback drippings over the top, a loose, clear gravy that wasted nothing from the morning's frying, dense enough to hold you through hours of labor. It asked nothing except the willingness to use what was already in the pan. Sweet potato toast offered seniors a nutritious breakfast using one of the most affordable and long-lasting vegetables available. A sweet potato, sliced lengthwise into thick planks, could be baked or pan-fried until tender inside and slightly caramelized outside. Topped with butter, cinnamon, and a drizzle of honey, it became breakfast. Spread with peanut butter, it provided protein to start the day. The beauty was in the simplicity, one ingredient transformed into something special. Sweet potatoes stored for weeks in a cool, dark place, making them practical for seniors who could not shop frequently. They were also packed with vitamins, fiber, and natural sweetness that needed no added sugar. Sweet potato toast connected modern simplicity with ancestral wisdom about humble ingredients. Sleeping 3 or 4 to a bed wasn't a hardship your grandmother talked about. It was just the arrangement, natural in the cold months, never questioned. Children piled in with their siblings and sometimes with the grandmother or aunt, not because there weren't enough beds, but because the heat 2 small bodies generated under a pile of quilts was more reliable than anything a landlord provided. A person at rest produces roughly the same warmth as a 60-watt bulb, and under 3 layers of quilts, that heat goes nowhere. The children who slept in the middle were always the warmest. The one on the outside edge near the wall was the one who woke at 3 and pulled the quilt tighter without waking anyone else. You learned to sleep still so you didn't let the cold air in. Years later, sleeping alone felt like something was missing. Not a person exactly, but the warmth of not being the only heat source in the room. Smothered chicken with onion gravy turned the cheapest parts of the bird into something that made grown men go quiet at the table. In the 1970s, whole chickens cost less than $1 a pound, and your mother stretched one across Sunday dinner and Monday lunch. She seasoned thighs and legs with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged them in flour, and browned them in cast iron until the crust went deep gold. The chicken came out. Thick sliced onions went in, sizzling in the drippings until they collapsed into something sweet. Flour went back into the fat, stirred fast, then broth hit the pan in a rush of steam that fogged the windows. The chicken returned, the lid came down, and the whole thing simmered an hour until the meat slid off the bone. Spooned over white rice, the gravy soaked through every grain. You knew it was done when the smell changed from sharp to deep and round. Only the person at the stove could read that moment. Number 15, fatback gravy over rice. A 2-ounce strip of fatback, that thick slab of salt-cured pigback fat that hung in butcher cases all over the rural South, cost about a dime in 1976 and made a senior cooking for one feel like she had a chef in the apartment. A widow in Plaquemine, Louisiana would render the fatback slowly in a small black skillet until the strip shriveled into a crisp brown curl. Then she pulled the curl out, ate it like a cracker, and stirred 2 tablespoons of flour into the hot fat. The roux browned in 3 minutes, turned the color of a brown paper sack, then she whisked in a cup of water and a splash of evaporated milk. That gravy went over a scoop of leftover rice from the morning. 1 supper, 10 cents. The crackling on the side was payment for cooking. They were following a memory. Number 19, blackstrap molasses milk, a tall glass of cold milk with 2 tablespoons of blackstrap molasses stirred until it turned dark and sweet. Mothers called it a tonic. Grandmothers said it built strong blood. They were not wrong. Blackstrap molasses contains more iron per tablespoon than a serving of spinach, and in communities where anemia was common and doctor visits rare, a glass every morning was folk medicine that worked. A jar of grandma's molasses cost 35 cents in 1965. Combined with milk at 49 cents a half gallon, 2 weeks of morning drinks for under $1. Children drank it cold in summer, warm in winter. Some mothers added a raw egg and shook it like a milkshake. The taste was dark and mineral, almost like coffee for a child. No one calls it a superfood. No one puts it on a menu. But the iron it delivered kept black children standing in classrooms where they were not always welcome. Number 15, corned beef hash, a can of corned beef, 2 potatoes, an onion. That was the shopping list. You diced the potatoes and onion, fried them until they browned, crumbled in the corned beef, and pressed everything flat. The bottom crisped golden, while the inside stayed soft. A fried egg on top turned it into a meal that stuck with you until morning. During World War II, corned beef was a military ration that crossed into black households nationwide. By the 1970s, a can cost 49 cents and became a pantry staple for seniors who needed protein that did not spoil. A retired factory worker in Gary, Indiana, made corned beef hash every Saturday for 12 years after moving north during the migration. He said the meal traveled with him the way a hymn travels. You did not need to write it down. Your hands remembered. Number 14, scrambled eggs stretched with flour. When a dozen eggs cost 57 cents and a household had 6 mouths to feed, you stretched the eggs with flour and nobody complained. 2 eggs got beaten in a bowl with a heaping tablespoon of flour and a splash of water until smooth. That mixture poured into a hot grease pan made enough fluffy curds to feed 3 children. The flour added body, the eggs added flavor, and the pan came out almost as full as if 4 eggs had gone in. Working mothers across the urban South used this trick on Wednesdays and Thursdays when payday was still 2 mornings away. Older folks today remember it as a perfectly normal breakfast and never once thought of it as cutting corners. It was simply how breakfast got made. What we now romanticize as soul food started right here at the kitchen counter with a tablespoon of flour stretching what our mothers had into what the household needed. Number 23, syrup biscuits for breakfast as supper. A widow in Birmingham mixed 2 cups of self-rising flour, a 1/4 cup of Crisco, and enough buttermilk to bring it together. She rolled the dough out on a square of waxed paper, cut biscuits with the rim of a Welch's jelly jar, and slid the pan into a 425 oven. 12 minutes. While they baked, she warmed Cairo dark syrup in a small saucepan with a knob of margarine until it was thin enough to pour. She split each hot biscuit, drizzled the syrup, and ate 2 for supper at 6 with a cup of Maxwell House coffee. The whole plate cost about 30 cents. Your great-grandmother had eaten the same thing in 1912 in rural Alabama when there was no meat. If you have ever had a hot biscuit with syrup standing in for supper, you know what your people were doing. The recipe was old. Your hunger was older. Number 20, red beans and rice. Pour the dry red beans into a heavy pot Monday night, cover them in cold water, and soak them through until morning, and you had the foundation of Tuesday supper in every Louisiana black household. Tuesday was wash day, and red beans needed almost no watching while sheets and work shirts hung on the line out back. A smoked turkey neck, a cut up yellow onion, 2 cloves of garlic, a bay leaf, a shake of Tony Chachere's, and fresh water to cover. The pot simmered low for 4 hours while everything else got done around the house. The beans broke down into their own thick gravy, served over hot white rice with a square of cornbread on the side and a splash of vinegar pepper sauce on top. It fed 5 working people for under $2.50 in 1984 dollars. Red beans were the Tuesday tradition that crossed state lines through the Great Migration. Number 28, stewed tomato and bread. By the time supper rolled around, a widow's pantry was often down to a can of Del Monte stewed tomatoes and the heel of a day-old loaf. She poured the 14-ounce can into a small saucepan on the coil, added a spoon of sugar to cut the tan taste, and dropped in 2 slices of torn-up white bread. The bread soaked up the broth and went soft like baby food. She finished it with a knob of margarine and a turn of black pepper from the shaker she had carried up from Arkansas in 1953. Working mothers in Birmingham fed this to teething babies and bedridden grandparents from the same chipped bowl. For a dime and a quiet 5 minutes, it was supper that knew how to stretch a single 10 into something a senior could call dinner on a Wednesday night. Number 25, chicken leg quarters and onion gravy. A chicken leg quarter was the cheapest piece of real meat in the store. 2 pieces for $1 on sale, sometimes less. Season them heavy with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and a shake of paprika. Lay them in the crock-pot skin side up, pile sliced onions on top until the onions covered the chicken completely, and pour in half a cup of chicken broth. Set it to low. After 6 hours, the skin had gone soft and the onions had melted into a dark, sweet gravy that pooled around the bottom of the pot. The chicken fell clean off the bone without pulling. Serve it over rice and spoon that onion gravy over everything twice. 1 plate of this, and the kitchen smelled the way it was supposed to smell on a weeknight when nobody was coming over and nobody needed to impress anyone. The leg quarter asked for nothing and gave back a full supper. The smell of stewed tomatoes and okra could fill a small apartment in minutes, and for seniors living alone, that mattered. It made the kitchen smell like somebody was still home. This combination traces directly to West Africa, where okra thickened soups long before it crossed the Atlantic in the holds of slave ships. Enslaved Africans in the South continued cooking okra with tomatoes as a one-pot meal, and it survived because it needed almost nothing. A can of tomatoes, a handful of okra, onion, salt, pepper. Some added a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. Others dropped in bacon for richness. Spooned over white rice, it became dinner from ingredients costing less than $1 even into the 1970s. The okra broke down slowly, thickening the broth into something silky and warm. You stood at the stove and stirred, and the apartment filled up with the smell of something old and familiar, and the quiet didn't press so hard for a while. Oatmeal with cane syrup and a spoon of fatback grease was not the oatmeal you know, not the instant packet, not the quick cooking kind with the bear on the box, but thick rolled oats that Black grandmothers across the South put on the stove every morning, which came out dense enough to hold a spoon upright and rich enough to carry a person through hard physical labor. The fatback grease was the alchemy. 1 spoonful stirred into the finished oatmeal added savory depth that changed the entire character of the bowl. No longer just sweet and starchy, but layered, filling in the way only animal fat fills you. Cane syrup went in after, drizzled in a slow figure 8 across the top, and the 2 flavors, smoky salt and sweet grass, met in the hot oats and became something neither was alone. Rolled oats were cheap and kept indefinitely. Fatback grease lived in a jar beside the stove in every kitchen she ever cooked in. In 5 minutes together, they became the kind of breakfast that held you until evening. The recipe is gone now. The jar is still on the shelf somewhere. Vegetable soup was the ultimate flexible meal, accepting whatever produce needed using up and transforming it into something nourishing and warm. A base of onions, celery, and tomatoes simmered with broth or water, then whatever. Vegetables were on hand. Carrots, potatoes, green beans, corn, cabbage, okra joined the pot. Seasonings were simple: salt, pepper, maybe a bay leaf or some thyme. For seniors, vegetable soup was practical and forgiving. It cost almost nothing when made from vegetables that were starting to wilt, and it provided fiber and vitamins in an easy-to-eat form. The soup kept well in the refrigerator and could be reheated throughout the week, each bowl tasting slightly different as flavors continued developing. A pot of vegetable soup meant security. Meals were covered, nutrition was handled, and comfort was assured. Spam survived the war, and then it survived poverty. And by the 1960s, toast sounds like nothing. And for a long stretch of history, that was the point. You toasted a slice of bread until it firmed, placed it in a shallow bowl, poured warm milk over it, sweetened with a spoon of sugar or a pinch of salt, depending on the house, and let it soak until the bread softened into something between solid and liquid. It had been called sick room food since the 19th century, given to people recovering from illness or to young children who needed something easy to get down. But in Black households during the Depression, when the stove was cold and the pantry held milk and stale bread and not much else, milk toast was simply breakfast. Some households added a drop of vanilla or cinnamon stirred into the warm milk before pouring. Those additions were not in any recipe. They came from whoever stood at the stove and whatever she felt that morning deserved. The last time you had it was probably the last time she was there to make it. Candied carrots turned an affordable vegetable into something that tasted almost like dessert while still counting as a proper side dish. Carrots were sliced into rounds or cut into sticks, then cooked in a skillet with butter, brown sugar, and a pinch of salt until they became tender and glazed with sticky sweetness. Some cooks added a splash of orange juice or a sprinkle of cinnamon for extra depth. For seniors living alone, candied carrots offered vegetables in a form that was appealing and easy to eat. The sweetness made them irresistible, even to those who claimed not to like their vegetables. A bag of carrots cost little and lasted weeks in the refrigerator, making this dish practical as well as delicious. Candied carrots proved that budget ingredients could become something special with just a little care. The plastic sheeting kit was not glamorous. It came in a roll you could buy at the hardware store for under $1. You cut it to size and tacked it against the window frame with strips of cardboard or straight pins, pulling it taut enough to create a sealed layer of still air between the plastic and the glass. That thin layer functioned like a second pane. Cold couldn't conduct through still air the way it conducted through glass, and the result was a window that let in the same light, but stopped a measurable share of the heat loss. The Philadelphia Tribune documented this as a common fixture in Black households throughout the 1960s, noting window kits were among the most widely used insulation methods in red-line neighborhoods where landlords had no legal obligation to maintain adequate heating. The plastic fogged and yellowed by February. You replaced it in October. It was the closest thing to a storm window most of these families ever had. If you did not grow up in a household that made chitterling loaf, you have probably never heard of it, and that is why the people who remember it hold on so tightly. This was not the same as a steaming pot of chitlins on New Year's Day. Chitterling loaf was the cold version. intestines boiled for hours, seasoned with vinegar, red pepper flakes, sage, and salt, then pressed into a loaf pan and waited until the natural gelatin set the whole thing solid. Sliced thin like cold cuts, it was served on bread or crackers with more vinegar and hot sauce. The texture was firm, slightly chewy, with a tang that hit the back of your throat. In the Carolinas and parts of Georgia, chitterling loaf was a fixture at church homecomings where the older women still made it from memory. By the 1980s, the dish had nearly vanished. Younger generations never learned the pressing technique, and without the right hands, the loaf would not hold. It slipped away quietly, the way things do when the only people who knew how stopped showing up. If the chitterling loaf belonged to the older women, the garden belonged to everybody. Number 21, stewed tomatoes over white rice. She would crack open a can of whole tomatoes for 29 cents at the corner store in North Nashville and pour them into a small saucepan with a knob of bacon grease, a chopped onion, and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. 20 minutes on a low burner broke the tomatoes down into a thick, sweet, salty sauce that filled the apartment with a smell most people associated with their mothers. She ladled it over a half cup of long grain rice that she had cooked plain in the same pot earlier. The whole supper cost about 35 cents in 1982 and took less than half an hour from start to fork. A retired hotel cook in Nashville used to say the tomato gravy was the difference between eating and being fed. One can of tomatoes carried her 2 suppers and a breakfast. This was not cuisine, this was engineering. Number 23, crackling bread. When a hog was slaughtered, the skin was cut into pieces and rendered until the fat melted and the skin turned into crunchy golden bits called cracklings. Those cracklings went straight into cornbread batter. The result was bread that crackled when you bit into it, rich with pork flavor and studded with crispy morsels. A pan of crackling bread could sit on the counter for 3 days and still taste good. In rural Georgia and the Carolinas, crackling bread with a glass of buttermilk was the traditional breakfast, and it did not need anything else. The cost was nothing because the cracklings were a byproduct of making lard, which was itself a byproduct of the hog already paid for. The hog gave meat for the smokehouse, fat for the lard bucket, and cracklings for the bread. Nothing went to waste because nothing could afford to. Number 14, tomato and rice skillet. A can of tomatoes, a cup of rice, an onion, a little bacon grease. That was the recipe 1,000 black grandmothers made on the nights between paydays. You sauteed the onion, added tomatoes and rice with enough water to cook the grain, and covered it for 20 minutes. The rice turned red. In the Gullah Geechee communities, this was called red rice, and it traced a direct line back to West African jollof. A retired shrimper in Beaufort made red rice 3 nights a week for 10 years. His skillet had been in the family for 4 generations. His great-grandmother cooked rice in the same pan when she was enslaved on a low-country plantation. The pan outlived the plantation. The recipe outlived the people who tried to own the people who made it. Number 12, liver mush, slices with hot coffee. Liver mush was the cheap North Carolina cousin of scrapple, and in black households across the Piedmont, it carried the cold months from October through to March. The loaf came wrapped in waxy butcher paper for about 30 cents a pound in 1963, less than half the price of any cured pork on the same counter. It was ground pork liver mixed with stone ground cornmeal, dried sage, and plenty of black pepper, then chilled solid in a loaf pan overnight until it cut clean. 2 cold slices hit a dry pan first thing in the morning and crisped up dark brown on both sides in under 5 minutes, no extra grease needed. A thick slice on a piece of light bread with a smear of yellow mustard fed a grown man straight through to his lunch break, and the mug of strong black coffee beside it finished the meal off. Number 9, smothered turkey wings with rice. A pack of 3 turkey wings at the corner store in Cleveland ran $2 in 1985, more than chicken parts, less than pork chops. A grandmother seasoned the wings hard with Lawry's, garlic powder, and black pepper, dredged them